Hey everyone, welcome back. Tonight we're starting with a story that doesn't ease you. It's about the moments that don't give you time to think, the ones where life tilts sideways without warning, and you're forced to make a choice you can't take back. Before we jump in, I just want to say thank you to everyone who's been supporting the channel. Whether you comment, lurk, or listen while you unwind, your presence here means more than you know, and it's the reason I keep coming back to share these stories with you. We're starting with a story about the split-second choices we make when the people we love are counting on us. Choices that can save a life but cost everything. Picture this. You're speeding toward the hospital, your mother having a stroke beside you when red and blue lights flash in your rearview mirror. In that moment, you have seconds to decide. Do you stop or do you keep going? I was sitting in my living room on a Tuesday evening when my mom called me from upstairs. Her voice sounded off. Not quite right. I jogged up to find her sitting on the edge of her bed, and the second I saw her face, my stomach dropped. The right side of her mouth was drooping. She tried to tell me she felt weird, but the words came out slurred, garbled, like her tongue wasn't working properly. Her right arm hung limp at her side. I've seen enough medical dramas to know what a stroke looks like. Time is everything. Brain cells dying by the second. I didn't even think. I just grabbed her good arm, helped her down the stairs as fast as I could without letting her fall, and got her into my car. The nearest hospital was 15 minutes away if traffic was good. I wasn't about to wait 40 minutes for an ambulance to arrive, assess her, load her up, and then drive her there anyway. Every second mattered. I was doing 70 in a 50 zone, hazard lights flashing, laying on my horn at every intersection. My mum was making these scared little noises next to me, trying to speak but nothing coming out right. I kept telling her to hold on, that we were almost there, that she was going to be okay. My hands were shaking on the wheel, but I kept my foot steady on the gas. Then I saw the red and blue lights in my rearview mirror. A cop had pulled onto the road behind me and hit his lights. I glanced at my mum. Her eyes were unfocused now, her breathing shallow. I made a decision in about half a second. I turned my hazards off and back on twice, trying to signal that this was an emergency, then kept driving. I wasn't stopping. I couldn't stop. The hospital was less than 2 miles away now. The cop stayed on me, siren blaring. I could see him in my mirror, probably radioing in that he had a runner. I didn't care. I kept my hazards going, kept honking my horn, trying to make it obvious this wasn't some joyride or a chase. This was life or death. My mum's head lolled to the side. I reached over and shook her shoulder, screaming at her to stay awake. When I finally screeched into the emergency room parking lot, I didn't even put the car in park properly. I just threw it into position near the entrance, jumped out, and started screaming for help. 2 nurses came running out with a wheelchair. I was trying to explain stroke, right side paralysis, slurred speech. They got her out of the car and rushed her inside. That's when the cop grabbed my arm. He spun me around, and before I could even process what was happening, he had me in handcuffs. I was yelling that my mum was having a stroke, that I had to get her here, that every second counted. He wasn't hearing it. He told me I was under arrest for evading police and reckless endangerment. I tried to pull away, tried to follow my mum inside, but he physically held me back while they wheeled her through those double doors. I spent the next 3 hours in the back of a police car in that parking lot while my mother fought for her life inside. He wouldn't let me go, wouldn't even let me make a phone call at first. I watched doctors and nurses rushing in and out of those doors and had no idea if she was alive or dead. The cop kept saying I should have pulled over, that I put everyone on the road in danger, that there are proper procedures for medical emergencies. This feels like a deleted scene from a sitcom, except nothing about it is funny. Here I am, handcuffed in a parking lot, while my mum is potentially dying 50 feet away because I followed my gut instead of procedure. They finally let me out after a hospital administrator came out and confirmed my mum had indeed been admitted with stroke symptoms. But the cop didn't apologize. He wrote me a citation right there. Failure to yield to emergency vehicle, reckless driving, evading police. He told me I'd be hearing from the district attorney's office about criminal charges. My mum survived. The doctors said she'd had an ischemic stroke, a clot-blocking blood flow to part of her brain. They were able to administer clot-busting drugs, but only because we got there within the critical window. The neurologist told me that if we'd arrived even 20 minutes later, the damage would have been permanent and severe. She would have lost mobility on her entire right side, possibly her ability to speak. As it was, she had a long road of physical therapy ahead, but she'd likely make a near full recovery. I should have felt relief. Instead, I felt this creeping dread. The court summons came 2 weeks later. I was being charged with reckless endangerment, a misdemeanor that carried possible jail time and a mandatory license suspension. My job is in deliveries. I drive for a living. Without a license, I don't have income. I hired a lawyer I absolutely cannot afford. He cost $3,000 just for the retainer, and he was the cheap option. We went to court with hospital records, doctor's statements, everything proving my mom had a genuine medical emergency. My lawyer argued necessity defense. I did what any reasonable person would do in that situation. The prosecutor didn't care. He said I endangered everyone on that road by driving recklessly, and that the proper procedure was to pull over, call 911, and wait for emergency services. He actually stood there and argued that protocol mattered more than outcomes. The judge seemed torn. I could see it on his face, but in the end he sided with the letter of the law. I was convicted of reckless driving. They dropped the evading charge and the endangerment charge down to reckless driving, which my lawyer said was a win. It didn't feel like a win. My license was suspended for 90 days. I was fined $1,500. I got 18 months of probation. I lost my job 3 days after the sentencing. My boss was sympathetic, but he couldn't keep someone on who couldn't drive. I've been doing gig work from home, barely making rent. My mum feels horrible about the whole thing. She keeps saying she wishes she'd just called the ambulance herself before it got that bad, that this is all her fault. I keep telling her it's not, that I'd make the same choice again, but I don't know if I believe that anymore. Then came the breaking point. The real cost wasn't the fines or even losing my job. It was what came after. My car insurance dropped me. Apparently, a reckless driving conviction makes you uninsurable with most standard carriers. The only company that would take me wanted $400 a month. For liability only, I can't afford that. So now I don't have a car I can legally drive anyway, and I can't afford insurance even when my suspension is up. I applied for over 60 jobs in 2 months. Every single background check came back with that conviction. Employers see reckless driving and assume I'm irresponsible, dangerous, a liability. Never mind the context. Never mind that I saved my mother's life. It's just a red flag on a piece of paper that gets my application tossed. My mom made a full recovery, by the way. She's back to normal, maybe a little slower on her right side, but functional, independent, alive. The neurologist said our quick response was the only reason she's not in a nursing home right now, but nobody wants to hear that part. All anyone sees is that I broke the law, that I made a choice that endangered the public, that I didn't follow procedure. I've had people, friends even, tell me I should have just pulled over, that the ambulance would have gotten there in time, that I was being dramatic and reckless. Easy to say when it's not your mother slumped in the passenger seat, unable to form words, her eyes full of terror. Easy to say when you're not watching the clock tick down on someone's brain function. You almost have to admire the audacity of a system that punishes you for saving a life because you didn't fill out the right forms first. The worst part is I'm still paying for it. The legal fees wiped out my savings. I'm behind on rent. I've sold most of my stuff just to keep the lights on. And every time I see my mum, healthy and whole and alive, I feel this weird mix of gratitude and rage. Gratitude that she's okay. Rage that doing the right thing cost me everything. People keep asking if I regret it, if I'd do it differently. Honestly, I don't know anymore. Logically, I know I saved her life. Emotionally, I'm drowning in debt and unemployment with a criminal record that follows me everywhere. Some days I think I'd make the same choice. Other days I wonder if maybe everyone else is right, if I really was just being reckless and it happened to work out. My court-appointed anger management class, which was part of my probation, keeps telling me to reframe the situation, to see it as a learning experience. I'm learning. All right. I'm learning that the system doesn't care about outcomes, only procedures. That doing the right thing doesn't protect you if you do it the wrong way. That saving someone's life can still ruin yours. My mum doesn't know how bad things have gotten financially. I haven't told her about the eviction notice or the fact that I've been eating 1 meal a day to stretch my food budget. She'd just feel worse, and what's the point of that? She's alive. That's what matters. That has to be what matters, because if it doesn't, then what the hell was any of this for? But sometimes the person you're trying to save isn't having a stroke. They're having a breakdown you didn't see coming. I was sitting in the conference room on the 14th floor, laptop open, presentation queued up, heart absolutely racing. This was it. 6 months of work, countless late nights, and one shot to prove I deserved the senior analyst position. The VP of operations was there. The regional director had flown in specifically for this. My manager had basically told me this presentation would make or break my entire trajectory at the company. No pressure, right? That's when my phone started buzzing. I glanced down and saw my brother's name flash across the screen. I hit the side button to silence it and kept my focus on the slides in front of me. 30 seconds later, it buzzed again. Same name. I silenced it again, feeling a flicker of annoyance. He knew I had this presentation today. I'd mentioned it at least 3 times over the past week. Whatever it was, it could wait 2 hours. The third call came just as the VP asked me to start. I flipped my phone face down on the table, muted it completely, and launched into my pitch. I was good. I knew I was good. The data was solid, the projections were conservative but promising, and I could see people nodding as I walked them through the strategy. Every slide landed. Every question I fielded felt like a win. I was nailing it. My phone kept lighting up on the table. 4, 5, 6, 7 calls. I didn't look. I couldn't afford to break my momentum. In my head, I made a quick calculation. My brother was dramatic sometimes. He'd call repeatedly if he was upset about something small, if he needed to vent about work or wanted advice about his girlfriend. It felt like classic him, honestly. Impatient, unable to wait. I remember thinking, with just a hint of irritation, that he really needed to learn boundaries. The presentation wrapped up after about 90 minutes. There were handshakes, compliments, even a few laughs about one of my slides. My manager pulled me aside and said quietly that I'd crushed it, that the position was as good as mine. I felt this rush of relief and pride and pure adrenaline. I'd done it. All that work had paid off. I picked up my phone as I walked back to my desk. 7 missed calls, 11 text messages. My stomach dropped before I even opened them. The first text was from an hour ago. Hey, can you talk? Then 10 minutes later, I really need you right now. Then the messages started getting worse. I can't breathe. Please pick up. Something's wrong. I need you. The last one, sent 20 minutes ago, just said, never mind. I called him immediately. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. I tried again. Voicemail. Texted him asking if he was okay. Nothing. I sat there staring at my phone, this cold dread spreading through my chest. All that pride from the presentation evaporating into something that felt a lot like panic. Then my mum called. Her voice was shaking. She told me my brother had a severe panic attack, that a neighbor heard him gasping for air through the apartment wall and called 911, that he was at the hospital, that he was physically okay but kept asking why I didn't answer. She asked very carefully where I'd been. I told her about the presentation. There was this long silence on the other end of the line. Then she just said, "Oh, honey," in this tone that made me feel about 2 inches tall. I drove to the hospital immediately. He was in a room in the ER, sitting on the edge of a bed, staring at the floor. He looked up when I walked in, and I've never seen that expression on his face before. It wasn't anger, it was worse. It was just empty, hollow. Like he was looking at a stranger. I started apologizing. I tried to explain about the presentation, about the promotion, about how I didn't know it was serious. He just nodded slowly, not really looking at me. Then he said very quietly, "You proved it." I asked him what he meant. He said, "You proved that work matters more than me, that a PowerPoint is more important than whether I'm okay. I always kind of wondered, and now I know." I tried to argue. I told him that wasn't fair, that I didn't know, that if I'd known it was an emergency, I obviously would have answered. He just shook his head. He said he'd called 7 times, that he'd texted me he couldn't breathe, that any reasonable person would have at least checked their phone. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't even upset, really. He was just stating facts. And somehow that made it so much worse. Things went from bad to unhinged. I kept trying to make him understand. I explained how important this promotion was, how it would mean more money for all of us, how I could help him out more, how it was for the family. He just stared at me with that same empty expression and said, "I don't want your money. I wanted my brother." Then he asked the nurse if I could leave. Just like that. Asked them to make me leave. My mom later told me he's in therapy now, that he talks about that night in almost every session, that his therapist is helping him work through feelings of abandonment and wondering if people actually care about him. My mom tried to be diplomatic about it, but I could hear the disappointment in her voice. She said he'd been having panic attacks for months, but never told anyone because he didn't want to be a burden. That night was the worst one he'd ever had, and he finally worked up the courage to reach out, and I didn't answer. I got the promotion 3 weeks later. They announced it in a company-wide email. People congratulated me. My manager took me out for a celebratory lunch. I smiled and thanked everyone and felt absolutely nothing. Every achievement feels hollow now. The raise hit my bank account and I just stared at the number, thinking about my brother asking the nurse to make me leave his hospital room. It's been 4 months. He responds to my texts with one-word answers. He doesn't call. He came to Thanksgiving but barely spoke to me. My mum says he needs time, that he's working through it, but I can see it in her eyes too. That question, what kind of person ignores 7 calls from their brother? What kind of person sees "I can't breathe" and thinks it can wait? If you've made it this far into the chaos, you're as addicted to Reddit drama as I am. Make sure to subscribe and tell me where you're watching from in the comments below. Now, back to how guilt can eat you alive. The worst part came about 2 months after the hospital. We were at my mum's house for Sunday dinner, one of those forced family gatherings where everyone pretends things are normal. My brother was picking at his food, barely contributing to the conversation. I tried asking him about work, about his girlfriend, anything to get him to engage. He gave short answers. Then, out of nowhere, he said something that I think about every single day. He said he almost didn't call 911 himself. That when the neighbor knocked on his door, he almost didn't answer, because if I wasn't picking up, if his own brother didn't think it was worth interrupting a meeting for, then maybe his panic attack wasn't real enough. Maybe it wasn't serious enough to bother the paramedics. Maybe he was just being dramatic, just like he'd always been told he was being dramatic his whole life. He said it so casually, like he was commenting on the weather, but my mum dropped her fork. The sound of it hitting the plate was the only noise in the room for what felt like an eternity. I just sat there, frozen, processing what he'd just said. That my silence, my choice to ignore his calls, had almost convinced him that his medical emergency wasn't worth helping. That my actions had confirmed every negative thing he'd ever thought about himself. I tried to respond. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. What do you even say to that? How do you apologize for making someone feel so worthless that they'd rather suffer alone than risk being told they're overreacting? He just shrugged and went back to eating, like he'd just mentioned he might rain later. That sentence broke something in me I don't think I can fix. I replay those missed calls constantly. I think about the exact moment each one came through. During the intro when I was making a joke about quarterly projections. During the slide about customer retention when everyone laughed. During the Q&A when the VP said my analysis was impressive. Each call was a moment I chose a spreadsheet over my brother's life. I've tried apologizing more times than I can count. I've sent long texts explaining, asking for forgiveness, begging for another chance. He usually just responds, "Okay," or "It's fine." But it's not fine. Nothing about this is fine. The promotion I worked so hard for feels like a prison sentence. Every meeting, every presentation, every congratulations from a colleague just reminds me of what it cost. My therapist says I need to forgive myself, that I made a choice with the information I had, that I couldn't have known how serious it was, that punishing myself won't change what happened. But here's the thing, I did have information. 7 calls is information. Text saying "I need you" is information. I just decided a conference room full of executives was more important than checking that information. I handed over the rope and tied the knot myself on this one. I can't blame the promotion, can't blame the timing, can't blame my brother for not explicitly saying, "This is life or death, please answer." I made a choice. I chose ambition over family. I chose career advancement over human connection. And now I get to live with that choice every single day. Watching my brother look through me like I'm a stranger, knowing that in the moment he needed me most, I proved exactly who I was. The promotion came with a new office, better view, closer to the executive floor, a door that actually closes. I sit in it sometimes and stare at my phone, at those 7 missed calls still in my log that I can't bring myself to delete. They're like a monument to my own selfishness, a reminder that I got exactly what I wanted, and it cost me the person who used to call me his hero when we were kids. I used to think Sarah from accounting was just a little careless. You know the type. Always rushing, always flustered, always apologizing for tiny mistakes that didn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. A decimal point here, a wrong date there. We shared a lot of reports since our departments worked closely together, and honestly, I didn't think much of it when I'd catch the occasional error. I'd just fix it and move on. That's what colleagues do, right? You cover for each other's slip-ups, keep things running smoothly, maintain some basic level of professional courtesy. But then I started noticing a pattern. Every time there was a mistake in our shared documents, somehow my name was attached to it. Not hers. Mine. At first I thought maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe I really was making these errors and just didn't remember. Imposter syndrome is real, and I'd been working long hours. So I started double-checking everything before I submitted it. Triple-checking, actually. I'd go through every single line, every number, every date, making absolutely certain that my sections were flawless before they went into the shared drive. The errors kept appearing anyway. Then came the breaking point. We had this massive quarterly budget report that was going directly to our VP. I spent 2 full days on my portion, cross-referenced everything with the finance team, had another colleague review my numbers just to be safe. I submitted it 48 hours before the deadline, feeling pretty confident. The meeting with the VP was supposed to be a formality, just walking through the numbers, answering any quick questions, standard stuff, except Sarah stood up in that meeting and pointed out a $50,000 miscalculation. In my section, she had this concerned, almost sympathetic look on her face as she explained to the VP that she'd noticed the error that morning, but hadn't had time to reach out to me before the meeting. She was so sorry to bring it up in front of everyone, but she felt it was too significant to let slide. I sat there feeling like I'd been punched in the stomach. The VP's expression shifted from confused to disappointed, and I could feel everyone's eyes on me. I tried to explain that I'd checked those numbers multiple times, that I didn't understand how this could have happened, but it just sounded like excuses, like I was scrambling to cover my mistake. The worst part was Sarah sitting there nodding sympathetically, like she felt bad for me, but what could she do? The numbers were wrong and my name was on that section. I got written up. Formally, it went in my file. My manager gave me this whole speech about attention to detail and the importance of accuracy in our work, and how disappointed she was because she'd always thought I was more careful than this. I nodded and took it, but inside I was screaming because I knew something was wrong. I knew I hadn't made that error. That night I went home and I made a decision. If Sarah wanted to play games, I was going to become the most meticulous, paranoid, documentation-obsessed person in the entire office. I started saving everything, every email, every Slack message, every single interaction we had. I started taking screenshots of my work before I submitted it, complete with timestamps. I began keeping a log of every time I accessed our shared files, every edit I made, every version I saved. You almost have to admire the audacity of what I found. Sarah wasn't just making mistakes and blaming me. She was actively, deliberately sabotaging my work. I discovered it by accident at first. I'd submitted a report on a Wednesday afternoon, taken screenshots of the final version like I'd been doing, and then checked the shared drive on Thursday morning just to see if anyone had accessed it. The edit history showed that Sarah had opened the file at 11:30 p.m. on Wednesday night, on a file that was already finalized and submitted. There was no reason for her to be in there, so I looked closer. I started comparing my screenshots to the versions that ended up getting reviewed, and there they were. Changes, small ones, subtle ones, the kind that would look like careless errors rather than sabotage. A transposed number here, a wrong formula there, a date shifted by 1 day, things that would make me look sloppy and incompetent, but not so dramatic that anyone would suspect intentional interference. But that wasn't even the worst part. I started digging through our shared drive, looking at folder permissions and access logs, trying to understand the full scope of what was happening. That's when I found it, a folder buried 3 levels deep in Sarah's personal directory, titled CYA. Cover your ass. I almost laughed when I saw it because the arrogance was just breathtaking. Inside that folder were screenshots, dozens of them. They were doctored images of our shared documents, edited to make it look like I'd made errors that I hadn't actually made, or to show timestamps that didn't match reality. She'd been building a case against me, creating fake evidence, preparing for the moment when someone might question her version of events. She had an entire arsenal of manufactured proof that I was incompetent. This feels like a deleted scene from a sitcom, except nobody's laughing. I sat at my desk staring at that folder for probably 20 minutes, just trying to process the level of calculation this required. This wasn't opportunistic blame shifting. This was premeditated, systematic. She'd been planning this for months, maybe longer. Every sympathetic look, every concerned comment about my mistakes, every time she'd offered to help me improve my accuracy, it had all been theater. She was literally manufacturing my failure. I spent the next week building my own case. I went through 6 months of edit histories, comparing timestamps and changes. I pulled email trails showing that I'd submitted clean work that later showed errors. I found Slack messages where she'd volunteered to do final reviews on shared documents, which I now realized gave her the perfect opportunity to sabotage them. I even requested security footage from our IT department for the days when some of the changes had been made, claiming I was trying to track down some missing files from my desk. The security footage was the final piece. There was Sarah, clear as day, sitting at my desk when I was in a meeting, logged into my computer. Our company had this policy where if you left your desk, you were supposed to lock your screen, but sometimes people forgot, especially if they were just running to a quick meeting in the same building. Sarah had apparently been counting on that. The footage showed her typing, clicking, clearly making changes to something, then logging out and walking away. She'd done it multiple times. I compiled everything into a presentation. Timelines, screenshots, email trails, edit histories, the security footage, everything. I made it as clear and undeniable as possible. Then I requested a meeting with HR and our director, not my immediate manager, because I wasn't sure how far up this went or who might be willing to overlook it. I went straight to the top of our department. When I walked into that conference room with my laptop and my printed documentation, Sarah was already there. She looked confused, like she didn't understand why she'd been called in. The director and HR rep looked mildly annoyed, like I was wasting their time with some interpersonal drama that should have been handled at a lower level. I opened my presentation and started talking. I kept my voice calm, professional, factual. I showed the timeline of errors, all attached to my name. Then I showed my screenshots proving those errors hadn't existed in my original submissions. Then the edit histories showing when the changes had been made. Then the emails, then the Slack messages, then the CYA folder with its doctored screenshots. Sarah's face went from confused to pale to absolutely white. She started to say something, tried to interrupt, but the HR rep held up a hand and told her to wait. I kept going. I showed the security footage. I watched Sarah watch herself sitting at my desk, making changes she had no authorization to make, sabotaging work that had my name on it. The room was completely silent when I finished. The director looked at Sarah and asked if she had any explanation. She tried, she really did, started talking about how she was just trying to help, how she'd noticed errors and was trying to fix them, how this was all a misunderstanding, but her voice was shaking and she couldn't explain the CYA folder, couldn't explain why she'd been at my desk, couldn't explain why her fixes somehow made things worse instead of better. They fired her on the spot, didn't even let her go back to her desk unsupervised. The HR rep walked her out while the director apologized to me, said they'd be removing the write-up from my file, said they'd be reviewing all the reports from the past year to see what else might have been compromised. Turns out I wasn't even her only target. After she was gone, 2 other people came forward saying they'd had similar experiences but hadn't been able to prove it. Sarah had apparently decided that sabotaging her colleagues was a viable career advancement strategy. She'd wanted my position, thought if she could make me look incompetent enough, she'd be the natural choice to replace me. They wrote their own ending without realizing it. All that effort, all that planning, all those late nights editing my work and building her fake evidence folder, and she'd just created a perfect documentation of her own misconduct. The arrogance of keeping a folder called CYA, like she was so clever, like she'd thought of everything. She had thought of everything except the possibility that someone might actually investigate. I got a promotion 6 months later. Sarah's position was eliminated entirely, folded into another department. Last I heard, she was working at a completely different company, and I genuinely hope she learned something from the experience. But honestly, I doubt it. People who are willing to sabotage others usually don't see themselves as the problem. Office politics are brutal, but they're nothing compared to what happens when someone with actual power decides you're their target. Marcus had the kind of reputation that made you feel lucky just to work under him. 3-time Manager of the Year, started a mentorship program that got featured in industry publications, volunteered at career fairs, spoke at conferences, had this whole personal brand built around lifting others up and creating opportunities. When I got assigned to his team, people actually congratulated me, told me I was going to learn so much, that Marcus was the kind of leader who changed careers. They weren't wrong. He did change my career, just not in the way anyone expected. The first few months were fine, normal even. He seemed engaged, asked good questions, gave feedback that felt constructive. But then I started noticing things, small things at first. I'd be deep into a project, maybe 3 weeks in, really hitting my stride, and suddenly it would get reassigned. Marcus would come by my desk with this apologetic smile and explain that he needed to shift resources, that someone else was better positioned to finish it, that it wasn't personal, just business needs. It happened once and I figured, okay, that's corporate life. It happened twice and I started feeling uneasy. By the 4th time, I realized there was a pattern. I'd do the research, the groundwork, all the heavy lifting, and then right before completion, right before it was time to present results or show outcomes, the project would go to someone else. They'd get the credit, they'd get the recognition. I'd get reassigned to something new, starting from scratch. Then came the meetings, or rather, the meetings I wasn't invited to. I'd hear about strategy sessions after the fact, find out decisions had been made about projects I was working on, but somehow my calendar invite had never come through. Marcus would apologize, say it must have been an admin error, promise to keep me looped in. It kept happening. The real turning point came when I landed a major client on my own. I'd been networking at an industry event, struck up a conversation with a VP from a company we'd been trying to break into for years, and managed to schedule a pitch meeting. I put together the entire proposal myself, presented it, negotiated the contract. It was mine, start to finish. 2 weeks later, in the quarterly executive meeting, Marcus presented my client acquisition as his strategic victory. Talked about his approach, his relationship building, his vision for the partnership. I sat there in that conference room, watching him take credit for my work, while the executives nodded and praised his initiative, and something inside me just crystallized. This wasn't accidental. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was deliberate. I started documenting everything. Every email, every project reassignment, every meeting I should have been in but wasn't. Every piece of work that disappeared from my portfolio. I created a timeline, tracked patterns, built a case. But I had this nagging feeling that I wasn't the first person this had happened to. So I started digging into Marcus's history, looked at team rosters from previous years, tracked down people who used to work under him, found 4 names, all women. All had left the company within 2 years of joining his team. That felt significant. I reached out to the first one through LinkedIn, asked if she'd be willing to chat about her experience working with Marcus. She got back to me within an hour, said she'd been waiting for someone to ask. We talked for 3 hours. She told me stories that were almost identical to mine, projects reassigned at the last minute, credit stolen, meetings she was excluded from. She'd eventually quit because she couldn't prove what was happening, couldn't make anyone believe that the beloved Marcus was systematically undermining her. The other 3 had similar stories. We started comparing notes, sharing documentation. That's when the real picture emerged. Marcus had been claiming their achievements in his performance reviews. One woman had developed an entire training program that got rolled out company-wide. Marcus's review that year credited him with creating it. Another had brought in a partnership that generated $2 million in revenue. Marcus's numbers showed it as his acquisition. He'd been doing this for over a decade, taking credit, stealing metrics, building his golden reputation on the backs of women he'd quietly pushed out of the company. And here's where it gets absurd. We discovered he wasn't just stealing from his own team. He'd been inflating his department's performance numbers by claiming metrics from adjacent teams. Revenue that his department had nothing to do with suddenly appeared in his reports. Client retention numbers from other divisions got folded into his success stories. He'd built an entire fictional performance record, and because he was so beloved, so trusted, nobody had ever audited it. We took everything to the executive board. 5 women, 10 years of evidence, a clear pattern of misconduct and fraud. We walked in with binders full of documentation, emails, performance reviews, financial records that didn't match up. We presented it like a legal case because that's basically what it was. The board launched an immediate investigation. It took them 3 weeks to untangle the full scope of what Marcus had done. The stolen credit was bad enough, but the fabricated metrics were potentially criminal. He'd been making the company believe his department was performing at levels that didn't exist, which had influenced budget allocations, strategic decisions, even investor presentations. They terminated him, not quietly either. They made an announcement to the entire company about conduct violations and performance fraud. His industry awards got revoked once the nominating organizations found out the achievements he'd claimed weren't actually his. The mentorship program he'd started dropped his name from all materials. But that wasn't even the worst part. The story went public. Someone leaked it to an industry publication, probably one of the executives who felt personally betrayed by the deception. The article detailed everything. The pattern of targeting women, the stolen achievements, the fabricated metrics. It named Marcus specifically. His LinkedIn profile had over 10,000 followers. He'd been building his personal brand for years, posting about leadership and integrity and empowering your team. Within a week of the article dropping, his profile was deactivated. Just gone. I heard through the grapevine that his wife left him when she found out. Apparently, some of his charity work had also been exaggerated, and she was humiliated by the public exposure. The poetic justice of it all is almost too perfect. Here was a guy who built his entire identity on being a great leader, a mentor, someone who elevated others, and it turned out to be completely hollow. He'd elevated himself by standing on people he'd pushed down. Imagine being this confidently wrong about your own character for that many years. The company promoted me 6 months later. Gave me Marcus's old position, actually. Some people thought that was awkward, but I saw it as appropriate. The role should have gone to someone from his team years ago, instead of him hogging it while cycling through talented people he sabotaged. The 4 women I'd connected with all got calls from HR, apologizing, offering their jobs back if they wanted them. 2 accepted. The other 2 had moved on to better things and politely declined. I restructured the entire department, made everything transparent. Project assignments go through a team vote now. Credit is documented and verified. Meeting invites are mandatory for anyone working on a project. And I instituted a policy where if you bring in a client, your name goes on that account permanently. Nobody can claim your work. People ask me sometimes if I feel bad about what happened to Marcus, if I think the consequences were too severe. His career is basically over. His reputation is destroyed. His personal life fell apart. And honestly, I feel nothing. He made calculated choices for over a decade. He looked at talented people and decided they were resources to exploit, rather than colleagues to support. He stole their work, their credit, their career advancement, and he did it with a smile while everyone praised him for being such a great mentor. The truth is, he destroyed himself. We just held up a mirror and made sure everyone else could see what we'd been seeing all along. All that rope he'd been collecting for years, weaving into this image of the perfect leader. Turns out it was exactly enough to hang himself with when the truth came out. Workplace betrayal is almost predictable. What really shatters you is when someone close weaponizes your darkest moments against you. I met Alex at a time in my life when I was finally starting to heal. I'd spent years in therapy working through my childhood, trying to unpack all the damage my father had done. The emotional abuse, the constant criticism, the way he made me feel like I was fundamentally broken and unlovable. It took a long time to even admit those things out loud, let alone trust someone enough to share them. Alex seemed different, safe. They listened when I talked about my past, held me when I cried, told me I was brave for surviving what I'd survived. About 6 months into our relationship, I told them everything, the full story. Things I'd never said out loud to another human being. The specific insults my father used, the ways he'd twist my words to make me doubt my own reality, the times he told me I'd never amount to anything because I was too sensitive, too broken, too damaged. Telling Alex felt like freedom, like I was finally seen and accepted anyway. They told me my father was wrong, that I was strong and whole and worthy of love. I actually cried from relief. I thought I'd found someone who understood. For a while, things were good. Better than good, actually. We moved in together, started building a life, talked about the future. But then the arguments started. Small disagreements at first, normal relationship stuff. Except Alex had a way of fighting that felt familiar in the worst way. They'd get frustrated and suddenly their words would have these sharp edges, these perfectly aimed cuts that hit exactly where I was most vulnerable. The first time they used my trauma against me, I almost didn't believe it was happening. We were arguing about something stupid, dishes or plans, or I don't even remember. I said I needed space to calm down, and Alex snapped, "Yeah, run away like you always do. No wonder your dad thought you couldn't handle anything." I froze. The room went cold. I asked them what they'd just said, and they backtracked immediately. Said they didn't mean it, they were just frustrated, it came out wrong. I wanted to believe them. I needed to believe them. So I did. But it happened again and again. During any argument that got heated, Alex would reach for the ammunition I'd handed them. "No wonder you're broken. Your dad was right about you. You'll never be normal, you know that?" Each phrase was something I'd confided in them, something my father had said to me, now being weaponized by the person I trusted most. It was psychological warfare, and they knew exactly what they were doing. They'd see me shut down, see the pain in my eyes, and sometimes they'd apologize after. Sometimes they wouldn't. They started saying I was too sensitive, that I couldn't take any criticism, that I was making everything about my trauma, when really I just needed to grow up and handle conflict like an adult. I felt like I was losing my mind. My therapist kept asking if I was safe in the relationship. I kept defending Alex, kept saying they were just stressed, kept blaming myself for being too damaged to handle a normal relationship. Exactly like my father had trained me to do. When I finally decided to leave, I thought the worst was over. I was wrong. And here's where it gets absurd. Alex didn't just let me go. They launched a campaign. They told our entire friend group that I was unstable, that I'd been making up stories about childhood abuse for attention, that I was manipulative and emotionally abusive toward them. They painted themselves as the victim who tried so hard to help me, but finally had to protect themselves from my instability. And everyone believed them, every single person. I started getting uninvited from gatherings. People stopped responding to my texts. I got blocked on social media by friends I'd known for years. When I tried to explain what had actually happened, I was told I was being vindictive, that I needed to stop spreading lies about Alex, that my behavior was exactly what they'd warned everyone about. I'd lost my partner and my entire social circle in one move. I spent weeks barely leaving my apartment, wondering if Alex was right, if I really was broken beyond repair, if my perception of reality was so warped that I couldn't even tell when I was being abusive. But then something shifted. I got angry. Not the hot, explosive kind, the cold, calculating kind, the kind that makes you methodical. I started thinking about evidence, about proof, about the fact that Alex's cruelty always came out in private, when it was just their word against mine. So I set up my phone to record our next interaction. I told Alex I wanted to talk about getting some of my stuff from the apartment. They agreed to meet. And during that conversation, when things got tense, they showed me exactly who they were. They said things I still can't repeat without feeling sick, mocking my trauma, laughing about how pathetic I was for believing they'd ever actually cared about my sob story. They admitted out loud that they'd never believed my abuse was real, that they thought I was exaggerating for sympathy, that they'd just pretended to care to keep me around. They called me broken, damaged, fundamentally unlovable, using the exact same words my father had used. I had every word recorded. I went home and I listened to that recording 3 times to make sure it was as damning as I thought. Then I sat down and wrote a message. Calm, factual, no accusations or drama. Just, this is who you chose to believe. and I attached the recording. I sent it to every single person in our friend group, every person who'd blocked me, uninvited me, chosen Alex's version of reality over mine. The response was immediate. My phone started blowing up within an hour. People calling, texting, some of them crying, apologizing, saying they didn't know, they didn't realize, they were so sorry. Some of them were angry at themselves for believing Alex so easily. Others were angry at Alex for manipulating all of us. Alex's reputation didn't just take a hit, it completely crumbled, overnight. People who'd been defending them were now sharing the recording, talking about other red flags they'd overlooked, realizing they'd been manipulated too. Alex's own family reached out to me. Their mother called me sobbing, apologizing, saying she'd raised them better than this, and she was horrified. Imagine being this confidently wrong about who the villain was in your own story. Alex tried damage control, made posts about how the recording was taken out of context, how I'd manipulated them into saying those things, how this was proof of my instability. But nobody was buying it anymore. You can't claim something's out of context when the context makes it worse. But that wasn't even the worst part. Not for Alex, anyway. About 2 months later, I heard through mutual friends that Alex had started dating someone new, someone they'd apparently been getting close to while we were still together, which explained some things in retrospect. They'd moved on fast, was posting all these photos about new beginnings and finding real love and leaving toxicity behind. Then the new partner found the recording. Someone from our friend group had shared it publicly, I guess as a warning to others, and Alex's new relationship imploded just as fast as it had started. The new partner didn't just leave quietly, they made a public statement about how they couldn't be with someone that cruel, someone capable of weaponizing trauma, someone who'd treat another human being with that level of calculated viciousness. That post got shared. A lot. Alex's cruelty became a matter of public record. Their name became synonymous with emotional abuse in our entire social sphere. Every new person they tried to date would eventually hear the story, hear the recording, and disappear. I didn't feel triumphant, I felt hollow. Because here's the thing about revenge, about exposing someone, about watching their life fall apart as consequence for their actions. It doesn't undo what they did to you. It doesn't give you back the months you spent doubting your own reality. It doesn't heal the reopened wounds or erase the echoes of your father's voice coming out of someone who claimed to love you. But it does create accountability. It does protect other people from becoming the next target. And sometimes that has to be enough. My therapist asked me if I regretted it. Sending the recording, destroying Alex's reputation, watching their life unravel. I thought about it for a long time before answering. And honestly, no, I don't regret it. Because some people need to face consequences. Some cruelty needs to be exposed. And sometimes the only way to stop being a victim is to become someone who refuses to stay silent. Alex reached out once, months later, asking if we could talk. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. They'd shown me who they were 100 times over. I finally believed them. Sometimes the cruelest betrayals come wrapped in romance, and nothing quite compares to discovering your future was built on lies. I was at Jenna's apartment 2 weeks before our wedding, going over final details with the caterer on a phone call, when my phone died. Dead battery, of course, right in the middle of confirming the head count. I asked Jenna if I could borrow hers real quick to finish the call. She handed it over without hesitation, didn't even look up from her laptop where she was working on the seating chart. That should have been my first clue that something was wrong, honestly. The complete lack of nervousness. I finished the call with the caterer, hung up, and was about to plug my phone in when her screen lit up with a text notification. I wasn't trying to snoop. I really wasn't. But the message was right there. Impossible to miss. Can't wait to see you after she's asleep again. From someone named Marcus, her gay best friend Marcus, who I'd met dozens of times, who was going to be at our wedding, who she'd known since college. My brain did this weird thing where it tried to rationalize it immediately. Maybe it was about a surprise party. Maybe they were planning something for the wedding. Maybe it was an inside joke I didn't understand. But my hands were already opening the message thread before my conscious mind caught up, and that's when my entire world tilted sideways. 6 months. 6 months of messages. And they were not discussing brunch plans or talking about RuPaul's Drag Race or any of the things I assumed gay best friends texted about. These were explicit, graphic photos. I really, really wish I could unsee. Hotel receipts with dates I recognized, nights when Jenna had told me she was having girls' nights or working late, detailed conversations about positions and preferences and things that made me feel physically sick. But that wasn't even the worst part. There were messages about our honeymoon. Our honeymoon that I'd spent months planning, that we were supposed to leave for 3 days after the wedding. They were discussing how to coordinate their meetups. She'll never know if we're careful. I'll tell her I'm going to the gym. You can say you're meeting college friends. They'd planned this. Planned to continue whatever this was right through our marriage. I sat there on her couch, holding her phone, reading message after message, and I felt weirdly calm, like my body had gone into some kind of shock mode where emotions weren't available anymore. Jenna was still focused on her laptop, humming quietly, completely unaware that I was reading proof of a betrayal so complete it rewrote our entire relationship. I didn't say anything. I just started taking screenshots. Carefully, methodically, I went through the entire conversation history and captured everything. The messages, the photos, the receipts, the planning discussions. I sent them all to my email. Then I deleted the sent messages from her phone, cleared the screenshots from her photo gallery, and handed it back to her. She smiled at me. Actually smiled and said, "All good with the caterer?" I told her yes, everything was perfect. Then I went home and spent the night staring at my ceiling, trying to understand how I'd missed this for half a year. The thing that kept running through my mind was how good she'd been at this, how normal everything had seemed. We'd been happy, or at least I thought we had. We laughed together, made plans together, talked about our future. She'd never been distant or suspicious or any of the things people describe when they talk about cheating partners. She'd been present, affectionate, excited about the wedding, and the whole time she was sleeping with Marcus and planning to continue after we were married. I thought about confronting her. I really did. I played out the conversation in my head 100 times. But every version ended with her crying, apologizing, making excuses, begging for another chance, and I realized I didn't want to hear it. I didn't want her explanations or her tears or her promises. I wanted her to feel the same blindside I'd felt sitting on her couch reading those messages. So I kept planning the wedding. I confirmed final numbers, picked up my suit, smiled through the rehearsal dinner. Jenna kept asking if I was okay, said I seemed distant. I told her I was just stressed about work, about the wedding logistics, about normal things. She believed me. Of course she did. She had no reason not to. The wedding day came. It was supposed to be perfect, and honestly, from the outside it probably looked like it was. The venue was beautiful. The flowers were exactly what Jenna wanted. Everyone showed up on time. I stood at the altar and said my vows, watching Jenna cry happy tears, and I felt absolutely nothing. Just this hollow numbness where love used to be. The reception is where things got interesting. We had this whole schedule planned out. Dinner, first dance, cake cutting, then speeches. I was supposed to give a toast to my new wife, thank everyone for coming, tell some sweet story about how we met. I'd actually written something weeks ago, before I knew. It was tucked in my jacket pocket, and I threw it away on my way to grab the microphone. Instead, I'd prepared something else, a slideshow. I told everyone I wanted to share our love story, show them the journey that brought us here. The AV guy I'd hired separately without telling Jenna queued it up on the big screen we'd rented for displaying photos during dinner. It started exactly how you'd expect. Photos from our first date, the night I proposed, vacations we'd taken together, holidays with family. Everyone was smiling. Some people were already tearing up. Jenna was beaming next to me, squeezing my hand. Then the photos changed. Screenshots of text messages filled the screen. Explicit ones. I'd edited out the actual graphic images because I'm not a complete monster. But the words were all there. Timestamps showing messages sent while we were together. While we were at dinner with my parents. While we were shopping for wedding rings. There was even one sent from our bed, from a night I specifically remembered because we talked about baby names before falling asleep. The room went completely silent. You could hear people's breathing. Jenna made this small, choking sound next to me. I looked out at the crowd and found Marcus. He He was already halfway out of his chair, face pale, clearly calculating his exit strategy. Jenna's mum stood up and said, "What is this?" Her voice was shaking. Her dad just sat there staring at the screen like he couldn't process what he was seeing. My own mother had her hand over her mouth, looking between me and Jenna with this expression of absolute horror. I let the slideshow run through every screenshot, hotel receipts, planning messages about the honeymoon, discussions about keeping this going after the marriage, the timeline of betrayal laid out in her own words for everyone to see. Then the final slide appeared, just text on a black background. The wedding's over, but the bar's paid for. Enjoy. And here's where it gets absurd. Jenna grabbed my arm, tried to pull me away from the microphone, started saying, "Let me explain. This isn't what it looks like, please." I just looked at her, really looked at her, and asked what explanation could possibly exist for 6 months of planning to cheat through our honeymoon. She didn't have an answer, just kept saying please over and over. Marcus was gone, literally just vanished. Later, I found out he'd run to his car and driven away before anyone could confront him. Jenna's family was in chaos. Her sister was crying, her mom was yelling, her dad looked like he wanted to put his fist through a wall. My family just looked sad, disappointed, but not surprised I'd chosen this method of ending things. I walked out through the side door, didn't run, didn't storm off dramatically, just walked. Got in my car and drove away from the venue while our first dance song played inside to an empty dance floor. The irony wasn't lost on me. The aftermath was predictable chaos. Jenna tried calling, texting, showing up at my apartment. Her family tried to mediate, said I'd humiliated their daughter, that I could have handled this privately. I told them she'd humiliated herself by planning to cheat through our marriage. I told them they could direct their anger at their daughter and her gay best friend, who apparently wasn't quite as gay as advertised. Marcus reached out once to apologize. I didn't respond. What was there to say? Sorry you got caught? Sorry you actively participated in destroying someone's life? I blocked him and moved on. The wedding venue kept the deposit, obviously. The honeymoon was non-refundable. I went alone. Actually, spent a week on a beach in Thailand reading books and trying to figure out who I was outside of a relationship that had been a lie. It was weirdly peaceful. People ask if I regret the public exposure, if I should have just cooled off the wedding quietly. Honestly, no. She'd spent 6 months lying to my face, planning a future that included both me and him, treating our relationship like a joke she was in on with someone else. She earned every second of that embarrassment. I just made sure the truth came out in a way that matched the scale of the betrayal. Lies in relationships are devastating, but what happens when the person meant to protect you becomes the mastermind of your downfall? I never thought I'd spend a night in jail because of my own sister. But there I was, sitting on a metal bench in a holding cell, trying to process what had just happened. The arrest had been surreal. 2 officers showed up at my door, told me I was being charged with assault and making threats. I'd asked what they were talking about, and they'd said my sister Vanessa had filed a report claiming I'd threatened her during an argument. I'd laughed at first, actually laughed because it was so absurd. They weren't laughing. The argument they were talking about had happened that afternoon. Vanessa had come over to discuss our late grandmother's jewelry. Grandma had passed away 3 months earlier, and we were still sorting through her estate. There were a few pieces Vanessa wanted, including this antique ring that Grandma had specifically left to me in her will. I'd told Vanessa no, that the will was clear, and she'd gotten upset. She'd raised her voice, called me selfish, said I was disrespecting Grandma's memory by not sharing. I'd stayed calm, told her we could talk about it later when she'd cooled down. She'd left angry, but that was it. A normal sibling disagreement. Nothing remotely threatening, except according to her police report, I'd cornered her, gotten in her face, and told her I'd make sure she regretted crossing me. She claimed I'd thrown a vase at her head, that I'd grabbed her arm hard enough to leave bruises, that she'd feared for her safety and had only escaped because she'd managed to run out the door. None of that happened, not even close. But here's the thing about accusations like that. Once they're made, you're on the defensive. You're trying to prove a negative, trying to convince people that something didn't happen, and that's almost impossible. The detective who interviewed me seemed skeptical of my denials, like, of course I'd say I didn't do it. Vanessa, meanwhile, had apparently given an Oscar-worthy performance at the station. Tears, shaking voice, the works. She'd even had a bruise on her arm, which I later found out she'd given herself. I spent that night in jail because I couldn't post bail until morning. I sat there replaying the afternoon in my head, trying to understand what was happening. This was my sister. We'd fought before, sure, but this was different. This was calculated, deliberate. She'd called the police and lied, knowing I could end up with a criminal record, knowing this could destroy my life. The next morning I hired a lawyer. He was expensive, the kind of expensive that made me wince when I signed the retainer, but I didn't have a choice. He listened to my story and asked if I had any evidence. I told him about my home security system. I'd installed cameras 6 months earlier after a break-in in the neighborhood, and they covered my living room and front entrance. Everything that happened that afternoon was on video. My lawyer subpoenaed the footage immediately. When we finally sat down to watch it with the prosecutor and detective, I felt this mix of vindication and disgust. There was Vanessa standing in my living room, yelling at me about the jewelry. There was me sitting on the couch responding calmly. Then you could see the moment something shifted in her expression. She looked at the camera, seemed to think for a second, then moved to a blind spot near the kitchen. What happened next? Nobody saw it coming. The audio picked up crashing sounds, Vanessa screaming, the sound of something breaking. Then she walked back into frame, her hair messed up, breathing hard, and pulled out her phone. We could hear her calling 911, her voice shaking as she reported that her brother had just assaulted her. The whole time I was still visible in the background, sitting on the same couch, looking confused and concerned. The detective's face when he watched that footage was something I'll never forget. Just this mixture of anger and embarrassment that he'd been played. The prosecutor immediately dropped all charges. They talked about potentially charging Vanessa with filing a false report, but I just wanted to be done with it. I wanted to move on and forget this nightmare ever happened, but I couldn't let it go. Not completely. Because as relieved as I was that the charges were dropped, I kept coming back to one question. Why? Why would Vanessa do something this extreme over a piece of jewelry? It didn't make sense. We'd argued about inheritance stuff before, and she'd never escalated to anything like this. So I started digging, and here's where it gets absurd. I started going through Grandma's financial records, the ones we'd received as part of settling the estate. I was looking for anything that might explain Vanessa's behavior, any financial pressure she might be under that would make her desperate enough to frame me. What I found was so much worse than I'd imagined. Vanessa had been stealing from Grandma for years, not just small amounts. We're talking systematic, sustained theft that had been going on for at least 3 years before Grandma died. There were forged checks, dozens of them, all signed in what looked like Grandma's signature, but with subtle differences that became obvious once you knew to look for them. Most were for amounts just under $1,000, small enough not to trigger immediate red flags. Then there were the credit cards. Vanessa had opened 3 different cards in Grandma's name, with statements going to a P.O. box that I tracked down as being registered to Vanessa. The balances totaled over $40,000. Clothes, vacations, furniture, all charged to cards that Grandma didn't even know existed. But the thing that made me physically sick was the heirlooms. I started calling pawn shops and antique dealers in our area, describing some of Grandma's pieces that had supposedly been lost or misplaced over the years. A vintage watch that Grandpa had given her. A set of silver candlesticks that had been in the family for generations. A collection of rare coins. Vanessa had sold all of it, piece by piece, pocketing the money while telling the family these items had been lost or donated. I compiled everything: bank statements, credit card bills, pawn shop receipts, copies of the forged checks, everything I could find. It took me 2 weeks of obsessive research, barely sleeping, just diving deeper into this web of theft and deception. The total amount Vanessa had stolen was somewhere north of $100,000 from our grandmother, a woman who'd trusted her, who'd loved her, who'd never suspected that her own granddaughter was systematically robbing her blind. And suddenly I understood why Vanessa had tried to frame me. She knew the estate records would eventually reveal what she'd done. She needed a scapegoat, someone to blame, or she needed me discredited enough that no one would believe me when I found out. If I had a criminal record for assault, if the family thought I was violent and unstable, my accusations would be easy to dismiss. She tried to destroy my credibility before I could destroy hers. The family meeting I called was brutal. Both of our parents, our uncle, our aunt, all of us gathered in my parents' living room. I presented everything methodically, document by document, showing the pattern of theft. Our mother started crying about halfway through. Our father just sat there with this expression of complete devastation on his face. Vanessa tried to deny it at first, said I was making it up, that I was still angry about the false police report and was trying to get revenge. But the evidence was overwhelming. The forged signatures that didn't quite match, the credit card statements with charges for things she'd posted about on social media, the pawn shop receipts with her signature on them. There was no way to explain it all away. Our parents asked her to leave just like that. Our father, who'd always called her his golden child, who'd bragged about her to everyone he met, told her to get out of his house and not come back. Our mother couldn't even look at her. Watching my sister walk out that door, seeing her realize that she'd lost everything, I felt this complicated mix of satisfaction and sadness. I filed a police report the next day. Elder abuse, fraud, identity theft, forgery. The detective assigned to the case said it was one of the most clear-cut examples of financial elder abuse he'd ever seen. Vanessa was arrested 3 days later. She's currently facing multiple felony charges, and her lawyer is trying to negotiate a plea deal. Our parents won't speak to her, won't take her calls, won't read her emails, won't even acknowledge her existence. She went from golden child to family pariah in a single afternoon, and honestly, she did it to herself. Every choice, every forged check, every stolen heirloom, every lie, they all built up to this moment. The irony is that if she'd just accepted my no about the ring, none of this would have come out. I wouldn't have started digging. The estate would have been settled quietly, and her crimes might have stayed buried. But she couldn't help herself. She had to escalate, had to try to destroy me to protect herself, and in doing so, she guaranteed her own destruction. I think about Grandma sometimes, about how she must have trusted Vanessa so completely, how she probably never suspected, even at the end, what was being done to her. That might be the worst part of all of this. Not what Vanessa did to me, but what she did to an elderly woman who loved her unconditionally. That's not something you come back from. Family secrets have a way of multiplying, and sometimes one lie unravels an entire lifetime of deception. The lawyer's office had that generic professional smell. You know the one. Old leather, expensive wood polish, probably some air freshener trying to mask decades of stress and bad news. We were all sitting there in these uncomfortable chairs that cost more than my rent, waiting for Dad's will to be read. Mom on one end, my brother and sister flanking her, me sitting slightly apart because that's just how our family worked. We weren't the type to huddle together for comfort. The will itself was straightforward. Everything split 3 ways between us kids. The house to Mom for as long as she lived, then sold and divided. Some specific items designated to specific people. Dad's watch to my brother, his book collection to my sister, his fishing gear to me, which made sense since I was the only one who ever went with him. Standard stuff, almost boring in how normal it all was. Then the lawyer pulled out a sealed envelope. Heavy cream paper, Dad's handwriting across the front. My name, my brother's name, my sister's name, and Mum's. The lawyer explained that Dad had left explicit instructions. This letter was to be opened only after his death, and only with all of us present. No exceptions. Mum reached for it immediately. Just shot her hand out, like she could grab it and make it disappear before anyone saw. The lawyer pulled it back smoothly, professionally, like he'd been expecting exactly that reaction. He said the instructions were clear and he was legally obligated to follow them. Mum sat back in her chair, and I swear I saw her face go grey. I should have known something was wrong right then, but I was too busy grieving, too busy trying to process that Dad was actually gone, to read the warning signs that were suddenly everywhere. The lawyer opened the envelope and started reading. Dad's voice came through in every sentence, that particular way he had of being direct but kind, straightforward but gentle. He said he loved us all, that he'd tried to be a good father and hoped we remembered the happy times, that he'd made his peace with death and we shouldn't grieve too long. Standard deathbed sentiment stuff that was making my sister cry quietly into a tissue. Then he said he had something important to tell us, something he'd kept secret for 32 years because he thought it was the right choice at the time. But now, facing the end, he realized that secrets poison everything. The room got very still. Even my sister stopped crying. Dad's letter said he wasn't my biological father, that Mom had an affair with his brother, my Uncle David, 32 years ago, that she'd gotten pregnant, ended the affair, and confessed everything, that Dad had forgiven her because he loved her too much to leave, and when I was born, he couldn't imagine life without me, that he'd raised me as his own because to him I was his own. Biology didn't matter. Love did. He said he was telling us now because keeping the secret had damaged our family in ways we didn't see, that living with a lie made genuine connection impossible, that he wanted us to know the truth so we could decide for ourselves what to do with it, rather than having it discovered accidentally after he was gone and feeling betrayed by his silence. The lawyer finished reading and the room just erupted. My brother stood up so fast his chair fell over. He started yelling at Mom, calling her a liar, a cheat, asking how she could do this to Dad. My sister was sobbing, full on hyperventilating. Mum was trying to explain, trying to reach for me, saying she was sorry, that it was so long ago, that Dad had forgiven her. I just sat there feeling like the floor had dropped out from under me. 32 years, my entire life, every memory, every moment with Dad, suddenly recontextualized. He wasn't my father. Uncle David was my father. Uncle David who came to Christmas dinner every year, who gave me terrible ties for my birthday, who I'd never felt particularly close to, but had always chalked up to personality differences. My brother left, just walked out mid-conversation, slammed the door hard enough that the diplomas on the lawyer's wall rattled. My sister followed him a few minutes later, still crying. Mum tried to get me to stay, to talk, to let her explain. I told her I needed time and got out of there. I called Uncle David that night. Didn't even think about it, just needed to hear him either confirm or deny it. He denied it. Immediately, emphatically, said Dad must have been confused at the end, that this was nonsense. But his voice shook. I told him we could do a DNA test, settle this scientifically. The silence on the other end of the line lasted way too long. Then I heard him breathing, heavy and uneven, and I knew. I knew before he said anything. He admitted it, said it was one mistake, one brief period of weakness 32 years ago, that he and Mom had ended it immediately, that he'd spent 3 decades trying to forget it happened, that he'd never thought of me as his son because I wasn't, not really, not in any way that mattered. He said he loved his brother and had lived with the guilt every day since. I asked if his wife knew. Another long silence. She didn't. He begged me not to tell her. Actually begged. Said it would destroy his marriage, that there was no point in ruining more lives over something that happened before some of his kids were even born. That's when everything unraveled. Because I didn't tell her, but my brother did. He'd apparently been doing his own digging, his own calling, his own confronting, and he was so angry, so betrayed on Dad's behalf, that he called my aunt and told her everything. Just dropped that bomb into her life without warning. Her marriage to Uncle David imploded within a week. She kicked him out, filed for divorce, told their kids that their father was a cheater and a liar. My cousins stopped speaking to me, not because they blamed me exactly, but because I was a living reminder of their father's affair. Looking at me meant thinking about the worst moment of their family's history. Family gatherings became impossible. Thanksgiving that year was just me, sitting alone in my apartment with takeout, because there was no neutral territory anymore. Christmas was worse. My sister tried to organize something, invited everyone, thought maybe we could push through this together. Half the family showed up. The other half refused to be in the same room as Mom or Uncle David. The people who did come spent the whole time in uncomfortable silence or passive-aggressive small talk. My brother hasn't spoken to Mom in over a year now, just completely cut her off. He sees her as the person who betrayed Dad, who lived a lie for 3 decades, who destroyed the family. My sister tries to play peacemaker, but she's drowning in her own grief and confusion. She keeps asking me how I'm handling it, like I'm supposed to have answers. The thing is, I'm grieving a father who wasn't genetically mine, but loved me anyway. A man who knew the truth from day one and chose me, who taught me to fish and helped me with homework and came to every single one of my soccer games even though I was terrible at soccer, who sacrificed his own pride and peace of mind to give me a stable childhood because he decided that's what fathers do. But I'm also processing that my entire identity was built on a lie, that half my genetic history is different than I thought, that the man I called uncle is actually my father, and the man I called father was actually my uncle, and none of the words make sense anymore. Oh, so we're doing that now? Just rewriting 32 years of family history in a single afternoon? I got a DNA test done anyway, even though I didn't need to. I guess I wanted it in writing, wanted the scientific confirmation to match the emotional devastation. It came back exactly as expected. Uncle David is my biological father. Dad, the man who raised me, shares no DNA with me at all. Mum keeps trying to explain. She calls, leaves voicemails, sends long emails about how much she loved Dad, how the affair was a mistake she regretted immediately, how Dad forgave her because they had something real. She says Dad wanted me to know because he didn't want me to find out accidentally, didn't want some random ancestry test or medical emergency to reveal the truth in a more painful way. She says he thought honesty would heal us, but Dad was wrong about that. The truth didn't heal anything. It just ripped open wounds that had been quietly festering for 3 decades. Uncle David's marriage is over. My brother won't speak to Mum. Family events are divided between Team Mum and Team Dad, like we're still fighting a war over something that happened before I could walk. My cousins treat me like a stranger. Extended family has chosen sides, and I'm stuck in the middle, grieving the only father I ever knew, while staring at the genetic reality that he wasn't my father at all. Trying to reconcile the man who tucked me in at night with the truth that we shared no blood. Trying to figure out if love is enough when the foundation was built on lies. Our family will never recover from this. I know that now. You can't unknow something like this. Can't unfeel this betrayal. Can't go back to holiday dinners and birthday parties and pretending everything is normal when the secret that held us together turned out to be the thing that destroyed us. Dad thought the truth would set us free. Instead, it just left us all trapped in separate corners, unable to find our way back to each other through the wreckage. DNA doesn't lie, and sometimes the truth hiding in our genes destroys more than just one relationship. I thought I was giving my mom a fun Christmas gift, one of those ancestry DNA kits that everyone was doing, the kind where you find out you're 3% Scandinavian or discover a fourth cousin twice removed in Minnesota. Harmless, interesting, a good conversation starter at family dinners. I wrapped it up, put it under the tree, genuinely excited to see what we'd discover about our family history. She opened it on Christmas morning in front of my stepdad and my younger half-sister. I watched her face go from curious to confused to absolutely pale. Like all the blood just drained out. She stared at that box like I'd handed her a live grenade. Then she looked at me and said very carefully that this was so thoughtful, but maybe we shouldn't actually use them. That these tests weren't always accurate. That our family history was boring anyway. That we should return them and use the money for something else. Every alarm bell in my head started ringing. My mum wasn't the type to turn down free information or a fun activity, and the way she was gripping that box, knuckles white, eyes darting to my stepdad, like she was calculating something. It was weird, wrong, suspicious in a way that made my stomach turn. So obviously I used mine anyway. Ordered another kit online, did the test in private, sent it off without telling anyone. If there was nothing to hide, then there'd be nothing to find, right? And if there was something to hide, well, I deserved to know what it was. The results took about 6 weeks. I got an email saying my genetic relatives were ready to view. I logged in expecting to see distant cousins and maybe some interesting ethnicity breakdowns. Instead, the first match listed was a close relative. Immediate family close. The kind of match that meant sibling or parent. Someone named Robert. I stared at that name for a solid 5 minutes. I'm an only child. Or I thought I was. My dad died when I was 16. I don't have siblings. This had to be a mistake. Some database error. Except the percentage match was too high to be anything other than a half-sibling. Robert had sent me a message through the platform. Just a simple, friendly note asking how we were related. Saying he was surprised to see such a close match. Mentioning he'd always known he had siblings out there, but never expected to find one this way. Siblings, plural, out there. Like it was just a known fact in his family that his dad had other kids somewhere. I messaged back asking who his parents were. He replied with 2 names, his mother I didn't recognize, but his father. His father's name made my hands shake, because I knew that name. My mum had worked for a man with that name almost 30 years ago. She'd been his executive assistant for 2 years before I was born, at some tech company that doesn't exist anymore. The math was mathing in the worst possible way. I confronted my mum that night, showed up at her house unannounced, pulled up the DNA results on my phone, and asked her point blank who Robert's father was. She tried to deny it at first, said it must be a mistake, that these tests weren't reliable, that I was jumping to conclusions. But I just stood there, phone in hand, waiting. And eventually she crumbled. She admitted she'd had an affair with her boss 28 years ago, that he was married with kids, that when she got pregnant, he'd panicked, offered her money to disappear. A lot of money, enough to start over somewhere new. She took it, took the money, moved to a different city, met my dad within a few months, and told him I was his. My dad, who'd been so excited to be a father, who'd loved me unconditionally my entire life, who'd raised me as his own without ever questioning it. Except, here's the thing, here's the part that broke me. My mum admitted during that conversation that my dad had found out the truth about 5 years before he died. Someone from her old job had contacted him, sent him information. I don't know the details, but he'd known. He'd known I wasn't biologically his, and he'd never said a word to me, never treated me differently, never made it my burden to carry. He'd just chosen to love me anyway, chosen to keep being my dad, protecting me from a truth that would shatter everything I knew about myself. And he died thinking I'd never have to know, that he'd taken that secret to his grave and spared me the pain of it. Oh, so we're doing that now. We're finding out the man who raised us wasn't our biological father, years after his death through a Christmas gift. Robert and I started talking regularly. Turns out he's 3 years older than me. Nice guy. Software engineer. Lives 2 states over. He'd always known his dad had affairs, that there might be other kids. His parents had gotten divorced when he was 12. Messy split. Lots of allegations about infidelity. His dad had apparently made a habit of this. Multiple affairs, multiple payoffs, multiple secret children scattered around who he'd paid to stay silent. Robert wanted to meet our biological father. I wasn't sure I did. This man had paid my mom to disappear, had erased my existence with a check, had gone on with his life while my mom lied to my real dad, the man who'd actually raised me. What was there to say to someone like that? But curiosity won out. We met him at a coffee shop, neutral territory. Robert had arranged it. Our biological father, this executive who'd ruined lives with his inability to keep it in his pants, walked in looking exactly like I'd imagined. Expensive suit, confident walk, smile that probably charmed investors and secretaries alike. He looked at me and I could see him doing the mental math, calculating my age, recognizing his own features in my face. He wanted a relationship, actually said those words, that he was divorced now, that he'd made mistakes but he'd changed, that he'd love to get to know me, to be part of my life going forward. Like 28 years of absence could just be glossed over with coffee and small talk. I asked him why he paid my mum off instead of being a father. He got uncomfortable, said he was married at the time, that it was complicated, that he was young and stupid and scared. Young. The man had been in his 40s, but sure, young and scared. That's definitely what that was. Robert was more forgiving than me. He wanted that relationship, wanted a dad in his life, even a flawed one. I got it. His childhood had been different from mine. He'd grown up knowing his dad was a cheating deadbeat. I'd grown up thinking I had the best dad in the world. And I did, just not the one whose DNA I shared. This is where patience finally snapped. Not for me, for everyone around me. Because once this information was out, it spread like wildfire through both families. My mum's second husband, my stepdad, found out about the affair and the payoff. Found out she'd built their entire relationship on a lie. That the reason she'd had money to start fresh in a new city wasn't because of smart investments like she'd claimed, but because she'd been paid off by a married man to disappear with his child. He left her. Moved out within a month. My half-sister stopped speaking to my mum entirely, called her a liar and a homewrecker, and said she didn't know who she even was anymore. My mum tried to explain, tried to justify it as protecting me, protecting our family, but there's no good spin on taking money to hide a child's paternity and lying to everyone for 3 decades. Robert's family wasn't any better off. His mum found out there was another affair baby, another child her ex-husband had hidden and paid off. It reopened old wounds. She started calling him again, yelling about things from their marriage 30 years ago, threatening new legal action. Robert's half-siblings from his dad's second marriage found out they had another half-sibling they'd never known about. Everyone was angry or hurt or confused, or all three. And our biological father, this man who'd caused all of it with his affairs and his checkbook solutions, tried to position himself as the victim, said he'd just been trying to do the right thing by everyone, that he'd given my mom money so I could have a good life, that he'd respected her choice to raise me with another man, respected her choice, like he'd had nothing to do with creating that situation in the first place. The level of delusion is genuinely impressive. My mom lost everything: her second marriage, her relationship with my half-sister, most of her friends once the story got around. Her carefully constructed life that she'd built on lies and hush money just collapsed. She called me crying a few months ago, asking if I hated her, asking if I could forgive her. I don't know if I hate her. I don't know if I can forgive her. What I know is that my real dad, the man who chose to be my father even when he found out I wasn't his biologically, died thinking he'd protected me from this. And she took that from both of us. She could have told me. She could have told him before he got sick. She could have come clean at any point in the last decade. Instead, she begged me not to use a DNA test and then watched it all unravel anyway. Robert and I are close now. Weird silver lining. I have a brother. He's a good person, easy to talk to. Nothing like our biological father. We get coffee every few weeks, text regularly. He's probably the only good thing that came out of this entire mess. Our biological father keeps trying, sends birthday cards, invitations to dinner, emails asking about my life. I don't respond. Robert does, maintains that relationship. And I respect his choice, but I don't need a father. I had one. He was the best man I ever knew, and he loved me without conditions or DNA tests or complicated paternity questions. That's more than enough. Sometimes betrayal isn't about stolen money or broken promises. It's about someone rewriting your entire childhood without your consent and watching everything you thought you knew turn out to be fiction. I grew up believing my father was a ghost, not literally, but close enough. He was this absence in my life that Mom had filled with stories. Stories about how he didn't want kids, how his career was always more important, how he walked out when I was 2 and never looked back. She'd get this sad look in her eyes whenever I asked about him, like talking about it hurt too much. So eventually, I stopped asking. She raised me and my sister alone, worked 2 jobs, struggled to pay bills, made sure we knew how hard it was without him, how he'd abandoned his responsibilities, how we deserved better than a father who couldn't be bothered to even send a birthday card. I believed every word. Why wouldn't I? She was my mum. She was there. He wasn't. I carried that narrative into adulthood. The deadbeat dad who chose himself over his family. It shaped how I saw relationships, how I understood commitment, how I thought about what it meant to be a parent. I used to tell people I didn't have a father, just a biological contributor who disappeared before the hard work started. Then I turned 25 and got a Facebook message that changed everything. It was from someone claiming to be my dad. The profile looked real, had photos going back years. Mutual friends with some extended family members I barely knew. The message was careful, almost formal. He said he'd been searching for me for years, that he understood if I didn't want contact, but he hoped I'd at least hear him out. He left a phone number and said he'd understand if I never called. I sat staring at that message for probably an hour. Part of me wanted to delete it, block him, protect the version of reality I'd always known. But there was this other part, this curious part, that needed to know. What could he possibly say after 23 years of silence? I called. We talked for 3 hours that first time. He cried. I stayed cold, defensive, waiting for the excuses, but the story he told didn't match the one I'd grown up with at all. He said he'd fought for custody, that he'd paid child support every single month, that he'd sent birthday cards and Christmas presents and letters that were all returned unopened. He said my mum had moved us 4 times without updating the court, changed our phone numbers, made it impossible for him to reach us. I told him he was lying, that Mum had been clear about what happened. He said he had proof and asked if I'd be willing to meet in person. Against every instinct, I said yes. We met at a coffee shop. He brought a box, Inside were court documents, receipts, returned mail. Years and years of evidence, custody petitions that Mum had fought against, child support payment records showing he'd paid every month without fail, birthday cards in envelopes marked "Return to Sender," letters he'd written to me and my sister, dozens of them, all sent back unopened. He had emails to the court trying to update his visitation rights when we'd moved, requests for information about where we were living that went unanswered. He even had a private investigator's report from 10 years ago, showing that he'd hired someone to find us, that the investigator had confirmed our location, but warned that any attempt at contact would likely be blocked by my mother. I sat there reading through document after document, and my entire childhood started reframing itself. Every time Mum had cried about being alone, every time she'd complained about money while his support payments were landing in her account, every birthday where she'd sadly mentioned that Dad didn't even remember. All of it had been theatre, calculated, deliberate deception. Then came the breaking point. I went home that night and confronted her. Calmly at first, I asked if she'd ever gotten child support from Dad. She said no, he never paid. I showed her the receipts. She said they must be fake. I asked if he'd ever tried to contact us. She said never, not once. I showed her the returned letters with her handwriting on the address labels, marking them refused. She tried to pivot, started saying she'd done it to protect us, that he was dangerous, that I didn't understand the whole story. But she couldn't explain the court documents showing she'd never once alleged abuse or danger. Couldn't explain why she'd moved us across state lines without notifying the court of our new address. Couldn't explain the boxes and boxes of gifts and letters she'd hidden from us. I realized in that moment that my entire childhood had been a lie, that she'd weaponized us against him, used us as tools in whatever twisted revenge she was enacting. We'd been denied a father not because he didn't want us, but because she didn't want him to have us. Thanksgiving was coming up. The whole extended family would be there. Mum's sisters, her parents, cousins, everyone. I spent 2 weeks making copies of everything. Court documents, payment receipts, letters, emails. I organized it all chronologically, made packets for each family member. Dinner started normally enough, everyone chatting, passing dishes, the usual chaos of a big family gathering. Then I stood up and asked for everyone's attention. Said I had something important to share about my childhood that everyone should know. Mum's face went pale immediately. She knew. But it was too late. I told them everything. About Dad's message, about the meeting, about the evidence. I passed out the packets as I talked. Let everyone see the documents, the returned letters, the proof of child support Mum had claimed never existed. I showed them the court records of Dad fighting for custody, of Mom moving us without notification, of her blocking every attempt at contact. You could have heard a pin drop. Mum tried to defend herself, started spinning a story about protection and fear, but my aunt cut her off, asked her directly if she'd really intercepted letters meant for her children. Mum couldn't answer. My grandmother started crying, saying she'd suspected something wasn't right, that she'd questioned why Dad never even tried to call, but Mum had always had an explanation. Mum's sisters turned on her. One of them had gone through a divorce and bent over backwards to facilitate her ex's relationship with their kids, despite her own hurt. She looked at Mum with this expression of complete disgust and said she couldn't believe her own sister would be cruel enough to weaponize children like that. The dinner fell apart. People left early, some without even saying goodbye to Mum. My grandmother hugged me for a long time and apologized for not pushing harder, for not demanding proof, for taking Mum's word when her gut told her something was wrong. What happened next? Nobody saw it coming. Within a week, I'd moved out of Mum's house and into a spare room at Dad's place. He introduced me to his entire side of the family, aunts and uncles and cousins I'd never known existed. They showed me photos of myself as a toddler that Dad had kept all these years, told me stories about how he'd talk about his kids, how much he'd missed us, how hard he'd tried to find us. My sister took longer to come around. She was angrier at me initially for disrupting the narrative we'd believed our whole lives, but eventually she met with Dad too, saw the same evidence, came to the same conclusion. We'd been lied to, systematically, deliberately, for our entire childhoods. Mum's left now with her lies and no children who trust her. She calls sometimes, leaves voicemails about how we don't understand, how she did what she thought was best, how we're breaking her heart. The irony is almost painful. She broke our hearts first, broke them before we even knew we had a father who wanted us, and she did it over and over again for 23 years. The relationship with Dad isn't perfect. We're still getting to know each other, still navigating decades of lost time. But it's real in a way my relationship with Mum never was. It's built on truth instead of manipulation, on documents and evidence instead of convenient lies. I think about all the birthdays Dad missed, not because he wanted to, but because Mum made sure he couldn't be there. All the school events he would have attended, the father-daughter dances, the graduations, the moments he wanted to be part of but was systematically excluded from. And I think about how Mom watched us grow up believing we weren't wanted, let us carry that wound because her need for revenge or control or whatever this was mattered more than our emotional well-being. She built her entire parenting identity on being the martyr who sacrificed everything for her kids. Turns out she was sacrificing us instead, sacrificing our right to know our father, our access to half our family, our understanding of our own story. Also, she could maintain a narrative where she was the victim and hero all at once. The saddest part is she probably still doesn't see what she did wrong, still thinks she was protecting us, still believes her version of events even when faced with undeniable proof. That's the thing about people who lie that deeply for that long. Eventually, they can't tell the difference between the truth and the story they've been telling anymore. Family inheritance can reveal character, but what happens when someone you trusted steals what was meant to be yours? When Grandpa died, he left $200,000 to be split between me and my brother Tyler. Equal shares, clean and simple, exactly the kind of straightforward inheritance that shouldn't cause any problems. Tyler was named executor because he was the older sibling, because he worked in finance, because Grandpa trusted him to handle things properly. I didn't question it at the time. Why would I? He was my brother. The first few months after the funeral, I gave Tyler space. I knew dealing with an estate took time, that there was paperwork and probate and all sorts of legal processes I didn't fully understand. When I'd ask about the timeline, Tyler would give me vague updates. Probate is slow, the lawyer's backlogged, we're almost done, just a few more signatures needed. It all sounded reasonable, plausible. The kind of thing you accept because you trust the person telling you. 6 months became 9 months. 9 months became a year. I was getting worried, not suspicious yet, just concerned that something had gone wrong with the process. I'd see Tyler posting on social media about his life, his trips, his new car, and I'd think maybe I should be more patient. Maybe this was just how long these things took. Then Tyler bought a house, a really nice house, posted photos of it online, talked about finally achieving his dream of home ownership, thanked his hard work and dedication for making it possible, and something in my brain just clicked. Tyler made decent money, sure, but not by a $400,000 house money, not without a substantial down payment, not unless he'd suddenly come into a large sum of cash from somewhere. I hired an attorney, not because I wanted to believe my brother had stolen from me, but because I needed someone who understood estate law to tell me I was being paranoid, that there was some perfectly reasonable explanation for why our inheritance was taking so long to settle. My attorney requested the probate records. What came back made my stomach drop. The estate had been settled 9 months ago. 9 months. Tyler had filed all the final paperwork, gotten the court's approval, and closed out Grandpa's estate. The $200,000 had been distributed exactly as specified in the will. Deposited into an account in Tyler's name as executor, to be dispersed to the beneficiaries, except he'd never dispersed it. He'd just kept it. All of it. Transferred it from the estate account into his personal account and used it like it was his own money. The down payment on his house came directly from Grandpa's inheritance. My inheritance. I called him, asked him directly when I could expect my share of the money. He fed me the same lines. Probate is complicated, lawyers still working on it. Should be soon. I told him I knew the estate had been settled 9 months ago. The silence on the other end of that call was deafening. Then he started making excuses. He'd been meaning to tell me there were some tax complications. He'd temporarily moved the money to get a better interest rate and was going to transfer my share any day now. I told him he had 1 week to transfer my $100,000, or I was filing a lawsuit. He laughed, actually laughed, and said I was being dramatic, that we could work this out as family, that getting lawyers involved was unnecessary. I hung up and called my attorney back. We filed suit for breach of fiduciary duty, theft, and fraud. Tyler hired his own lawyer and tried to claim the money had been spent on estate expenses, that he was entitled to executor fees, that I was misunderstanding the situation. But the paper trail was crystal clear. He'd stolen $100,000 and used it to fund his lifestyle. That's when everything unraveled. During discovery, my attorney subpoenaed Tyler's financial records. We needed to track where the money had gone, prove that he'd used it personally, rather than for legitimate estate purposes. What we found was so much worse than I'd imagined. Tyler had been stealing from our Aunt Margaret too. Our elderly aunt who'd been diagnosed with dementia 3 years ago. He'd convinced her to give him loans, substantial ones, telling her he'd pay her back with interest. 15,000 here, 20,000 there. He'd visit her, talk about investment opportunities, explain how he could help her money grow if she'd just trust him. She'd written him checks, withdrawn cash, transferred money into his accounts. There were dozens of transactions. He'd taken over $150,000 from a woman with dementia who barely remembered the conversations a week later. Her caretaker had noticed the withdrawals and flagged them to Adult Protective Services, but Tyler had smooth-talked his way through the initial investigation, claimed they were legitimate loans, that Margaret was lucid when she'd agreed, that he had every intention of paying her back. The court documents laid it all out, a pattern of financial exploitation spanning years. Our grandfather's estate was just his most recent theft. He'd been systematically stealing from vulnerable family members and using his position of trust to get away with it. I didn't just want my money back anymore. I wanted everyone to know exactly who Tyler really was. I told his church, sent the court documents to the pastor, explained that their congregation had been praising and supporting a man who stole from his elderly relatives. They removed him from his position leading the finance committee. Asked him to find a new church home. I told his employer. Tyler worked as a financial advisor, convinced people to trust him with their retirement funds. I sent his managing director copies of the lawsuit, the discovery documents showing his theft from family members. They fired him within a week. Can't have someone managing client money when they're actively stealing from their own grandmother. I told his country club, posted about it in the members' Facebook group, attached public court records, explained that the man they'd been golfing with every weekend was funding his membership with stolen inheritance money. They revoked his membership. I told every mutual friend we had. Didn't embellish, didn't exaggerate, just sent them links to the public court documents and let them draw their own conclusions. Tyler's reputation as this successful, trustworthy financial advisor evaporated overnight. People started sharing the story, warning others. His name became synonymous with family betrayal and elder abuse. His client list disappeared. Nobody wants a financial advisor who steals from his own family. His professional network abandoned him. Nobody wants to be associated with that kind of scandal. Even his social circles collapsed. Who wants to be friends with someone capable of exploiting their grandmother's dementia for profit? Things went from bad to unhinged when his wife left him. She'd apparently had no idea about any of it. Thought the house, the lifestyle, all of it was funded by Tyler's legitimate income and maybe some modest inheritance. Finding out her husband was a thief who'd stolen from elderly relatives was too much. She filed for divorce and made sure everyone knew why. The lawsuit took 18 months to fully resolve. Tyler tried every delay tactic, every excuse, every attempt to paint himself as the victim. But the evidence was overwhelming. The court ruled in my favor, ordered him to repay my $100,000 plus interest and damages. Also mandated he repay everything he'd stolen from Aunt Margaret, with the court appointing a conservator to manage her finances going forward. Tyler had to sell the house, the car. Everything he'd bought with stolen money got liquidated to pay his debts. His legal fees alone bankrupted him. He'd spent tens of thousands trying to defend the indefensible, and it got him nowhere. The last I heard, he's living in a studio apartment, working retail, and will be paying off his debts for years. His professional licenses got revoked, his credit is destroyed, his marriage is over, his reputation is unsalvageable. People ask me sometimes if I feel bad about how completely I dismantled his life, if maybe I went too far by making everything so public, And honestly, no. He made calculated choices to steal from vulnerable people who trusted him. Our grandfather, who'd worked his whole life to leave something for his grandchildren. Our aunt, who couldn't even remember giving him money because her mind was failing. He saw their vulnerability as an opportunity. I didn't ruin Tyler's reputation. I just made sure everyone knew what it actually was. He'd built this image of himself as successful and trustworthy while funding it with stolen money. All I did was tell the truth and let the consequences unfold naturally. You almost have to admire the audacity of thinking you can steal $100,000 from your own sibling and they'll just never notice. I got my inheritance eventually, every penny Grandpa intended for me, and I got to watch Tyler face actual consequences for once in his life. The golden child who'd always charmed his way out of trouble, who'd convinced everyone he was successful and trustworthy, finally got exposed for exactly what he was, a thief who preyed on his own family. Betrayal in love hits different when you realize the red flags were there all along, hidden in plain sight. I thought I was losing my mind. Emma came home one Tuesday night with tears streaming down her face, holding a single earring between her fingers like it was evidence in a murder trial. She asked me whose it was. I had no idea what she was talking about. She said she found it in my car, wedged between the passenger seat and the center console. A woman's earring, silver, dangling, definitely not hers. I told her I had no clue how it got there, that maybe it belonged to her friend who I'd given a ride to last month, or maybe it had been there since I bought the car used 2 years ago. She wasn't hearing it. She was devastated, crying in a way that felt genuinely heartbroken, saying she couldn't believe I'd do this to her. I kept trying to explain, kept insisting I hadn't cheated, but the more I defended myself, the guiltier I apparently sounded. That was just the beginning. Over the next 2 weeks, more evidence appeared. A lipstick stain on a dress shirt I didn't remember wearing. Receipts from restaurants I'd never been to. Charged to a credit card I rarely used. Text messages on our phone bill from numbers I didn't recognize. Each piece of evidence came with Emma getting more hurt, more distant, more convinced I was having an affair. I started doubting myself. I'm serious. I actually wondered if I was somehow blacking out and living a double life. The evidence was there, physical, undeniable things that existed in the real world. But I had zero memory of any of it. I suggested maybe someone had stolen my credit card information. She asked why a thief would use my card at romantic restaurants instead of buying electronics. Fair point. My best friend Jake finally asked me the question I should have asked myself from the start. What if she's projecting? What if all this concern about me cheating is because she's the one doing it? I laughed it off initially. Emma was the one crying, the one hurt, the one gathering evidence. Why would someone cheating accuse their partner first? But the question stuck with me. So I did something that felt crazy at the time, but turned out to be the smartest decision I ever made. I installed a GPS tracker on the car we shared, and before anyone comes at me, the car was in my name. I was legally allowed to track my own vehicle. I told myself I was just ruling out the possibility, proving Jake wrong so I could move past his paranoid suggestion. The tracker went live on a Monday. By Wednesday, I had a pattern. Emma was visiting the same apartment complex 3 times a week, staying for 2 to 3 hours each time. An apartment complex across town, nowhere near her work or her gym or any place she had a legitimate reason to be. When I asked her casually about her day, she'd tell me she'd been at the office late or out with friends, never mentioned this apartment complex. I followed her there once, parked down the street, watched her pull into the lot, watched her walk up to a second-floor unit and let herself in with her own key. Watched her through the window, visible for just a moment before curtains closed, kissing a man I'd never seen before. She stayed for 2 hours, came out looking relaxed, happy, adjusted her hair in the car mirror before driving away. The betrayal hit different than I expected. It wasn't the cheating itself, though that hurt. It was the setup, the careful, calculated way she'd framed me first. The tears she'd cried while accusing me of the exact thing she was doing. The evidence she'd planted to make me look guilty. To position herself as the victim, to ensure that when she finally left me, everyone would think I'd driven her away with my infidelity. But that wasn't even the worst part. I started digging deeper, looking at our shared cloud storage, recovering deleted text messages, checking our bank statements more carefully. Emma had been planning this for months, She'd bought that earring herself, left it in the car deliberately. The lipstick wasn't from another woman, it was hers, a shade she never wore, applied to my shirt while I was asleep. The restaurant receipts were real, but she'd taken my card without telling me and gone out with this other guy, then left the receipts where I'd find them. She was setting me up to be the villain in a story where she was the victim. That way, when she left me for this other guy, everyone would understand. They'd sympathize with her. They'd blame me. She'd get to walk away with her reputation intact while mine was destroyed. The level of premeditation here is actually wild. I gathered everything: GPS logs showing her visits to the apartment, photos I'd taken of her entering and leaving, text messages between her and this guy that I'd recovered from the cloud, discussing their future together, laughing about how I had no idea, bank statements showing charges she'd made with my card. I compiled it all into a folder, organized chronologically, irrefutable. Emma had been pushing for us to have a reconciliation dinner with both our families. She wanted to work through our issues, she said, wanted our parents there to mediate, to help us rebuild trust. I agreed, but I had my own plans for what that dinner would look like. Both families showed up to my place on Saturday night. Her parents, my parents, her sister, my brother. Emma had been telling everyone how hurt she was, how she was trying so hard to forgive me, but the evidence of my cheating was just so overwhelming. She'd positioned herself as the gracious, forgiving girlfriend, giving me one more chance. Everyone looked at me with this mixture of disappointment and hope that I'd somehow make it right. I set up the TV, told everyone I wanted to show them something. Emma looked nervous for the first time. I think she thought maybe I was going to play some romantic video or slideshow, some grand gesture of apology and commitment. Instead, I pulled up the GPS logs, showed them the pattern of visits to an apartment that wasn't ours, showed them the photos of Emma entering that apartment. Then I played the recovered text messages on the screen. Her messages to this guy, messages about how much she loved him, how she was just waiting for the right moment to leave me, how she needed me to look like the bad guy first so the breakup wouldn't hurt her reputation. The room went completely silent. Emma's face cycled through emotions faster than I could track. Shock, confusion, anger, panic. She tried to grab my laptop, tried to turn off the TV. Her dad actually had to hold her back. She started yelling that I'd invaded her privacy, that tracking her was illegal, that I was a psycho. I calmly explained that tracking my own car wasn't illegal, and that I'd only done it after she'd spent weeks accusing me of cheating and planting false evidence. That's when I showed them the evidence she'd planted. The credit card statements proving she'd made those restaurant charges herself, the receipts for the earring purchased from a boutique downtown charged to her personal card, text messages where she'd discussed with a friend which shade of lipstick would show up best on a white shirt. Her mother actually gasped. Her dad looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. My parents just looked sad, disappointed in the situation, but relieved I hadn't actually done what I'd been accused of. Emma's sister asked about the guy, asked if he knew Emma was still with me, still living with me, still planning family dinners while seeing him 3 times a week. The look on Emma's face told me everything. He didn't know. She'd been lying to both of us, keeping us separate, playing us against each other. I'd already contacted him earlier that week, sent him the same evidence package, explained that Emma was living with her boyfriend while sleeping with him, that she'd been using both of us, that everything she'd told him about me leaving her was a lie. He'd responded with shock and anger, said he'd had no idea she was still in a relationship. By the time this dinner happened, he'd already broken up with her, blocked her number, told her he wanted nothing to do with someone capable of that level of deception. So Emma sat there at this reconciliation dinner, in front of both our families, realizing she'd lost both of us in one night. The backup plan and the primary relationship gone. Her carefully constructed narrative of being the wronged girlfriend, exposed as fiction. Her reputation, the thing she'd been so carefully protecting by framing me, destroyed by her own actions. Things went from bad to unhinged. Emma started screaming. Not crying, screaming, yelling that I'd ruined everything, that I was vindictive, that I should have just let her go quietly, like she hadn't spent weeks making me question my own sanity, planting evidence, crying fake tears, turning me into the villain of a story I didn't even know I was in. Her parents took her home, apologized to me on their way out. Her dad actually shook my hand and said he was sorry I'd been put through this. My family stayed for a bit, helped me clean up, asked if I was okay. I honestly didn't know. I felt vindicated but also hollow, like I'd won a game I never wanted to play. Emma moved out the next week, didn't try to talk to me, didn't try to explain or apologize, just packed her stuff and left. I heard through mutual friends that she'd tried to get back together with the other guy, showed up at his apartment crying. He wouldn't even let her in, told her through the door that he couldn't trust someone who'd manipulated two people that thoroughly. The mutual friends stopped being mutual pretty quickly. Once the full story got around, people chose sides, and most of them didn't choose hers. Hard to sympathize with someone who plants evidence and gaslights their partner for months as part of an exit strategy. I still think about how close she came to pulling it off. If Jake hadn't suggested she might be projecting, if I hadn't installed that tracker, if I'd just accepted her accusations and broken up with her like she wanted, she would have walked away looking like the victim. I'd have been the cheater in everyone's mind. She'd have moved on with her new guy, and nobody would have known the truth. But some people don't just betray you once. They turn your pain into their weapon and watch you suffer while positioning themselves as the hero of your destruction. Jake spent 6 months telling everyone who'd listen that I was the villain in our relationship, that I was controlling, abusive, that he'd barely escaped with his sanity intact. Mutual friends stopped responding to my texts. People I'd known for years crossed the street to avoid me. I'd show up at gatherings and watch the room go quiet, feel the judgment radiating off people who'd already decided I was the monster Jake said I was. The thing is, our breakup hadn't even been dramatic. We'd been together for 2 years, and towards the end he'd just become distant, cold, spent more time on his phone, took more work trips, stopped being present even when we were in the same room. When I finally asked if he wanted to end things, he'd seemed almost relieved. We'd had a calm conversation, divided our stuff, and went our separate ways, or so I thought. Apparently, while I was processing the end of a relationship like a normal person, Jake was out there crafting a narrative where he was the traumatized survivor and I was his abuser. He gave detailed accounts of arguments that never happened, described controlling behavior I'd never exhibited, painted himself as someone who'd suffered in silence and finally found the courage to leave. I was devastated, confused. I kept replaying our relationship, trying to find the moments he was describing, wondering if I'd somehow been abusive without realizing it. My therapist helped me see that his stories didn't match reality, but the social damage was done. I'd lost friends, lost community, all because Jake needed to be a victim. Then I got a message from someone named Maria. She said we needed to talk about Jake, that she'd been seeing him and had some questions. My first instinct was to ignore it, to not get dragged back into his drama, but something about the message felt urgent, genuine. So I agreed to meet her for coffee. Maria had been dating Jake for 6 months. 6 months that overlapped with the last 6 months of my relationship with him. All those work trips, all that distance, it had been her. But here's the thing. Jake had told Maria the exact same story about me. That I was his abusive ex who he'd barely escaped from. That I was dangerous and unstable. That she should never try to contact me because I'd probably try to hurt her. We sat in that coffee shop comparing notes, and the full picture started emerging. The timelines didn't just overlap with me. There were gaps in Jake's availability that neither of us could account for. Nights he'd told me he was working late, but told Maria he was at a family obligation. Weekends he'd been unavailable to both of us, with completely different excuses. Maria started doing some digging. Social media deep dives, asking around in different friend groups, following threads. Within a week she'd found 3 more women. 3. All of them with overlapping timelines. All of them told the same story about an abusive ex Jake had barely escaped from. All of them believing they were helping him heal from trauma while he was actively dating multiple other people. And here's where it gets absurd. Jake had a whole system, separate phones for different women, a detailed calendar tracking who he was supposed to be with when, different social circles that never intersected, fake business trips that were actually time with one of us. He'd been running this operation for years, and the victim narrative was his insurance policy. If anyone ever questioned him or found out, he'd already poisoned that well, already made sure no one would believe us over him. Maria organized a meeting with all 5 of us. We met at her apartment on a Tuesday night, 5 women who'd all been dating the same man, who'd all been lied to, who'd all been turned into villains in a story Jake was telling to cover his own betrayal. We compared photos, texts, timelines, built a comprehensive documentation of his lies. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable. One of the women, Claire, had screenshots of Jake telling her he loved her on the same day he told me he needed space. Another woman, Jen, had photos of a weekend getaway Jake had taken her on while telling Maria he was at a work conference. The web of deceit was so extensive, so carefully constructed, that part of me had to admire the sheer amount of effort it must have taken. Imagine being this confidently wrong about your own character. We decided we were done being his victims, done being the villains in his story, done letting him control the narrative. Jake's 30th birthday party was coming up. Big event. All his friends and family held at his brother's house. All 5 of us had been invited at various points before the truth came out. We coordinated our arrival. The party was already going when we showed up. Together. All 5 of us walking in as a group. You should have seen the confusion on people's faces. Jake was across the room talking to his parents. Hadn't seen us yet. His brother answered the door and just stood there, mouth open, clearly trying to process why 5 women were arriving together at his brother's birthday party. We asked if we could use the TV for a quick presentation. Said it was a birthday surprise. His brother, still confused, but assuming this was some coordinated gift thing, agreed. We plugged in Maria's laptop and pulled up the slideshow we'd prepared. It started innocently enough. Photos of Jake with each of us, dates displayed prominently. Jake and Maria, March 2023. Jake and Claire, February 2023. The room started getting quiet as people realized the dates overlapped. Then came the screenshots, text messages to multiple women on the same day. Love confessions sent within hours of each other to different people. Photos from trips he'd claimed were work-related, showing him with various girlfriends. The timeline was color-coded, showing how he'd juggled 5 relationships simultaneously. We included his victim narrative, showing messages where he'd told each of us about his abusive ex, with a note pointing out that the ex he was describing to each woman was actually just whichever one of us he'd dated previously. Jake saw what was happening and tried to shut it down, literally ran to unplug the laptop. But his brother blocked him, held him back, wanted to see the rest. The presentation continued, every lie documented, every manipulation exposed, every woman he'd victimized given a voice. His mother started crying. His friends looked horrified. Someone shouted asking if this was real, and all 5 of us just nodded, stood there as a united front while Jake's entire constructed reality crumbled around him. He tried to run, actually sprinted out of the party, got in his car, and drove away from his own birthday celebration. Left his family and friends standing there processing what they'd just learned. His brother apologized to us, said he'd had no idea, that if he'd known he never would have defended Jake's version of events. But we weren't done. We'd spent too long being silent, being the secret victims of his manipulation. We posted everything online, not just on our personal pages, but in the local community groups, the professional networks Jake was part of. We made sure everyone who knew him saw the truth, saw the evidence, saw the pattern of behavior that he'd hidden behind his victim narrative. The response was immediate and brutal. Jake's professional reputation tanked overnight. He worked in finance at a firm that prided itself on ethics and integrity. When they saw the posts, saw the evidence of systematic lying and manipulation, they let him go, cited a morality clause in his employment contract. His career in that city was basically over. Friends who'd believed him, who'd shunned us on his behalf, started reaching out, apologizing, asking how they'd been so wrong about him. Some of them were genuinely remorseful. Others just seemed embarrassed they'd been fooled. Either way, the narrative had shifted. Jake was no longer the victim. He was the predator we'd always known him to be. He tried a few half-hearted attempts at damage control, posted some vague things about his side of the story, about how people don't understand the full context. But nobody was buying it anymore. The evidence was too clear, the pattern too obvious. 5 women with the same story, backed up by timestamps and screenshots, versus one man who'd been caught in an elaborate web of lies. Last I heard, he'd moved to a different state, Tried to start over somewhere his reputation hadn't preceded him. I don't know if he's still running the same scams or if he actually learned something. Honestly, I don't care. He's not my problem anymore. Maria and I are still friends, actually. So are the other women. We have a group chat where we occasionally check in, share updates about our lives, joke about our shared terrible taste in men. Something positive came out of the disaster. We found each other, found solidarity in our shared experience, turned Jake's attempt to isolate and villainize us into a source of strength and connection. The friends I lost weren't worth keeping anyway. Anyone who'd believe that narrative about me without even asking my side wasn't really my friend to begin with. The people who matter, who actually knew me, either never believed Jake or apologized when the truth came out. The rest can stay in the past where they belong. Sometimes the truth doesn't set you free. It burns down everything built on lies, including friendships you thought were solid. But sometimes that fire is necessary. Sometimes you need to burn it all down to rebuild something real. For 7 years, these people were my closest friends. We did everything together. Weekly game nights, group vacations, endless group chats about nothing and everything. They weren't just friends, they were my people. The ones who knew my worst moments and loved me anyway. Or so I thought. Then one Tuesday in March, I woke up to silence. Complete, total silence. I checked my phone and realized I'd been removed from every group chat. Blocked on Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat. I tried texting people individually and the messages turned green. I'd been blocked on iMessage too. Every single one of them, overnight, had cut me out like I'd never existed. I spent the first day thinking it was some kind of mistake. A glitch, maybe. Or a prank that would be funny for about 5 minutes before they let me back in. By the second day, I was panicking. Texting from different numbers, sending emails, trying to figure out what I'd done wrong. No one responded. It was like I'd been erased. By the end of the first week, I was a mess. Couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, just kept replaying every recent interaction trying to find the moment I'd screwed up badly enough to deserve this. I went through our last group hangout frame by frame in my memory. Had I said something offensive, done something hurtful? I couldn't find it. Then I ran into Maya at the grocery store. She looked uncomfortable when she saw me, tried to duck down a different aisle. I caught up to her and just asked directly what I'd done. She looked at me with this mixture of pity and disgust and said she couldn't believe I was still playing innocent, that Sophie had told everyone about the things I'd been saying behind their backs, the secrets I'd been spreading, the drama I'd been causing. I stood there in the cereal aisle, completely confused, asking what she was talking about. Maya rattled off a list of things I'd supposedly said or done, that I'd told Jake that Emma was talking about his drinking problem, that I'd shared Rachel's private family issues with people outside the group, that I'd been making fun of Sophie's relationship to mutual friends. None of it was true, not a single thing. But Maya wouldn't believe me. She said Sophie had proof, had screenshots, had witnesses. She walked away before I could defend myself. I went home and cried for 2 days straight. Then I got angry, really, genuinely angry, because I knew I hadn't done those things, which meant someone was lying, and the common denominator in all of Maya's examples was Sophie. I still had access to our old group chat archives. We'd been using the same Discord server for 3 years, and while they'd kicked me from the active channels, the old message history was still there in my DMs and saved conversations. I started going through everything, not just recent stuff, but years back, looking for patterns, looking for proof of whatever Sophie had used to turn everyone against me. What I found was so much worse than I'd imagined. Sophie had been orchestrating drama for years. She'd screenshot private conversations and send them to other people, but carefully cropped to remove context. She'd created fake accounts to send anonymous messages stirring up conflict. She'd tell person A that person B was mad at them, then tell person B that person A was talking behind their back, then sit back and watch them fight while positioning herself as the mediator, trying to keep everyone together. There were dozens of examples, hundreds maybe. I found a conversation where she'd told Emma that I'd called her desperate, but when I found the original message, I'd actually been defending Emma against someone else who'd said that. Sophie had just cropped out everything except the word desperate next to my name. I found fake Instagram accounts Sophie had created to send anonymous messages to people in the group, messages designed to create insecurity and conflict. She'd send Rachel anonymous messages saying the group found her annoying. She'd send Jake messages saying people were worried about his relationship. Always anonymous, always just vague enough to create doubt, without being traceable. And here's where it gets absurd. I found her notes, actual notes she'd kept in a private channel she'd created, documenting her manipulations, like a playbook. Told M that Jay thinks she's too sensitive, should create distance between them. Sent an on message to R about her weight, she'll be insecure at beach trip. It was methodical, calculated. She'd been doing this for years, keeping careful track of who she'd manipulated and how. The purpose became clear the more I read. She wanted to be the center, the one person everyone trusted, everyone confided in, everyone needed. By creating conflicts between everyone else and then positioning herself as the mediator, the trusted friend, the one who understood both sides, she made herself indispensable. We all needed her to navigate our friendships with each other because she'd made those friendships so fragile. I spent 2 weeks compiling evidence, screenshots with full context, timelines showing her contradictory stories, examples of the fake accounts, complete with technical details showing they'd all been created from the same IP address. Her private notes documenting her manipulations. I organized it all chronologically, made it impossible to deny or explain away. Then I sent it individually to each person. Not in a group, not as an accusation, just as information. I know you don't want to hear from me, but before you write me off completely, I need you to see this. I included timestamps, context, explanations. I showed them how she'd manipulated each of them specifically, using their own conversations as evidence. The responses came slowly at first. Emma messaged me after 2 days, just a simple, I need to think about this. Jake called me drunk and crying after 3 days, apologizing, saying he should have known something was off. Maya showed up at my apartment a week later and just hugged me without saying anything. One by one, they started reaching out, started comparing notes, started realizing that the things Sophie had told each of them didn't line up, that the screenshots she'd shown them were cropped or out of context, that the anonymous messages they'd received all had the same writing style and the same agenda. We organized a meeting, everyone except Sophie. We sat in Jake's living room and just talked for hours, shared our experiences, compared the lies we'd been told, realized the extent of the manipulation. Emma had been told I was jealous of her. Rachel had been told I thought she was a burden. Jake had been told I'd tried to sabotage his job interview by talking to his ex who worked at the same company. None of it was true. All of it had been Sophie's manipulation. But that wasn't even the worst part. As we compared notes, we realized she'd been doing this to everyone. We'd all been isolated at various points. We'd all had fights that seemed to come out of nowhere, based on things someone had supposedly said but couldn't quite remember saying. We'd all received anonymous messages designed to make us insecure. The entire group dynamic for 3 years had been manufactured by one person's need for control. We decided to confront her together. All 6 of us showed up at her apartment unannounced. She opened the door, smiling, probably expecting one person she could manipulate, and instead found all of us. Her face went through about 5 different expressions in 2 seconds. We didn't yell, didn't accuse, just asked her to explain. Showed her the evidence, the timeline, the pattern. Asked her directly if she'd been manipulating us. She tried to deny it at first, said we were ganging up on her, that this was exactly the kind of thing she'd been trying to protect us from. But we just kept showing her proof, her own words, her own notes. Finally, she broke, started crying, saying she was afraid of being left out. That she'd seen other friend groups drift apart and she couldn't let that happen to us. That she'd just been trying to keep everyone together, to make sure we stayed close. The logic was twisted beyond recognition. She'd nearly destroyed the group to save it, had isolated people to keep them connected, had created conflict to maintain peace. We told her it was over, that none of us could trust her after this, that the friendship we'd thought we had with her had been built on lies and manipulation. She begged, promised to change, said she'd get help, but the damage was too complete. You can't come back from this level of betrayal, can't rebuild trust when you've been systematically destroying it for years. We all blocked her that night, created a new group chat without her, started rebuilding what she'd broken. It's been 6 months now, and we're closer than we were before, probably because we're actually communicating directly instead of through Sophie's filter. We know what real friendship looks like now because we've seen what fake friendship does. Sophie tried reaching out a few times. Long apologies, promises of therapy, explanations about her childhood and her fears. But none of us responded. Some betrayals are too fundamental to forgive. Some manipulations are too extensive to overlook. The group is different now, smaller, more careful, more intentional about communication. We don't let things fester, don't rely on one person to mediate everything, don't accept anonymous messages or screenshots without context. We learned our lesson about trusting the wrong person with too much power. I still think about those 7 years sometimes. Wonder how much of it was real, and how much was Sophie's construction. Wonder what our friendships would have looked like without her manipulation. But mostly, I'm just grateful we figured it out, before it destroyed everything completely. Workplace theft is common, but what happens when someone steals your actual work and presents it to the people who matter most? I spent 6 months developing a client retention strategy that I genuinely believed could transform how our company operated. 6 months of research, data analysis, client interviews, competitive benchmarking. I'd stay late most nights, come in early some mornings, completely immersed in building something that could actually make a difference. This wasn't just busy work or a minor process improvement. This was a comprehensive strategy that could potentially save the company millions in client churn. My colleague Devon had access to all my files because we shared a project drive. It was standard practice in our department, meant to encourage collaboration and transparency. We'd worked together on smaller projects before, always cordially, never particularly close but professional enough. He'd occasionally ask how my retention project was going, seemed genuinely interested, offered a few suggestions here and there that I'd politely considered and mostly ignored because they didn't quite fit the direction I was taking. I had a presentation scheduled with the CEO for a Friday afternoon. This was huge. The CEO rarely took meetings with individual contributors. Getting an hour on her calendar meant someone higher up believed in what you were doing. I'd been preparing my presentation deck for weeks, rehearsing my talking points, anticipating questions, making sure every slide was perfect. Wednesday morning, Devon called in sick, said he had some kind of flu, wouldn't be in for a few days, sounded genuinely miserable on the phone. I didn't think much of it. People get sick. It happens. Thursday afternoon, I got an email from the CEO's assistant. My meeting was being rescheduled because Devon had completed an urgent proposal that the CEO wanted to review immediately. The new meeting was scheduled for that same Friday slot I'd been given. My stomach dropped. Something felt off. Devon had never mentioned working on anything urgent, and why would his proposal take my meeting slot specifically? I logged into our shared project drive and my heart just stopped. My files were gone. All of them. 6 months of work, hundreds of documents, spreadsheets, presentation decks, research notes. Everything I'd built was just gone from the shared drive. I checked my local backups, my computer's file history, anywhere I might have saved copies. Most of it was there, scattered across different folders and versions. But the panic was setting in. Had I been hacked? Had there been some kind of system error? Then I did something I'd been doing throughout the whole project as a personal backup habit. I'd been emailing myself updates, major milestones, completed sections, key insights. Whenever I finished something significant, I'd send it to my personal email with a note about what I'd accomplished. It was paranoid, maybe, but I'd heard too many horror stories about people losing work to crashed hard drives or corrupted files. I started going through those emails, reading the timestamps, and that's when I understood. Devon hadn't called in sick. He'd stolen my entire project and was presenting it to the CEO as his own work. And here's where it gets absurd. I showed up to Devon's presentation completely uninvited. Just walked into that conference room like I had every right to be there. The CEO looked surprised. Her assistant tried to stop me. Devon went pale, literally lost color in his face when he saw me. But I smiled politely and said I had some context that might be helpful for this discussion. Devon was mid-pitch when I interrupted. He was using my slides, my data, my exact phrasing, talking about client retention strategies like he'd spent months developing them. The CEO was nodding along, clearly impressed, asking good questions that Devon was fumbling to answer because he didn't actually understand the underlying research. I asked the CEO if I could provide some additional context. She looked annoyed at the interruption but gestured for me to continue. I'd brought printed copies of everything, emails time-stamped from 6 months ago showing the project's inception, early drafts with my digital signature embedded in the document properties, progress updates I'd sent to my personal account, each one dated and showing the evolution of ideas. I laid it all out calmly, methodically, showed how my emails predated Devon's access to the shared drive by months, pointed out how the language and writing style in the proposal matched examples of my previous work, even highlighted how Devon had copied some of my typos, grammatical quirks I had in early drafts that I'd later corrected in my local versions, but that still existed in the files he'd stolen. The CEO's expression shifted from confused to furious in real time. You could see her processing it, connecting the dots, realizing she'd almost been completely fooled. She asked Devon directly if this was his work. He tried to claim we'd collaborated, that it was a team effort, that I was trying to steal credit for joint work. I pulled out the access logs from our shared drive, showed exactly when Devon had first opened my files, 2 weeks ago. Meanwhile, I had documentation going back half a year. He'd viewed my completed work, copied everything, deleted the originals from the shared drive, and assumed I wouldn't have backups. The CEO called security. Actual security. Devon was escorted out of the building immediately, told to collect his personal items under supervision, and terminated for intellectual property theft. The whole thing took maybe 20 minutes from when I walked into that conference room to when Devon was being walked out by 2 security guards. I gave my actual presentation the following week. The CEO cleared 2 hours for it, wanted to see everything, asked detailed questions that I could actually answer because I'd done the work. She apologized formally for the situation, said the company took intellectual property theft seriously, and that she was personally embarrassed she'd almost been deceived. A month later, I got promoted into Devon's old position. His bonus for the quarter got redirected to me as compensation for the attempted theft. I got a formal letter of apology from HR and the executive team. The client retention strategy I'd developed got implemented company-wide and saved millions in the first year alone. Devon tried to find work in our industry after, but word spreads fast in professional circles. What he'd done wasn't just unethical, it was career suicide. Companies talk to each other, especially at senior levels. His name became synonymous with intellectual property theft and dishonesty. Last I heard, he'd left the industry entirely because he couldn't get hired anywhere reputable. The level of confidence it takes to steal 6 months of someone's work and present it as your own in front of the CEO is genuinely staggering. Looking back, I'm almost grateful for my paranoid habit of backing everything up. If I hadn't been emailing myself those updates, if I hadn't kept local copies, if I hadn't documented my process obsessively, Devon might have gotten away with it. I'd have looked like the crazy person claiming someone stole my work with no proof. He'd have gotten the credit, the promotion, the recognition, and I'd have been left with nothing but accusations nobody could verify. Instead, he got exactly what he deserved: public humiliation, immediate termination, and an industry-wide reputation as someone who can't be trusted. And I got vindication, recognition for work I'd actually done, and a career boost that came from merit rather than theft. The best part is how completely avoidable this was for him. He could have done his own work, could have developed his own ideas, could have built his career on actual accomplishments instead of stolen ones, but he chose the shortcut, assumed I wouldn't have proof, and bet his entire professional future on a lie that took me 20 minutes to dismantle with time-stamped emails. And that's where we'll leave things tonight. 15 stories of betrayal, revenge, and those moments when people finally got what they deserved. If you've made it this far into the chaos, you know the truth. Karma might be slow, but she's always taking notes. Sweet dreams, everyone. And remember, the best revenge isn't always fire and fury. Sometimes it's just the truth, delivered at exactly the right moment. Same time tomorrow night for more stories that prove reality is stranger than any fiction we could write. Until then, sleep well, and maybe check your shared drives.